Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto was the last scion of a primordial force bloodline. Nay, Naruto x Ahsoka Tano, Star Wars, The Clone Wars. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Echo of a Dying Star. The air on Ilum was a razor, so thin and cold it seemed to steal the breath from one's lungs before it could ever truly be drawn. Each gasp was a protest, a futile rebellion against a world that was actively trying to freeze the life out of any who dared to tread its crystalline surface. For Ahsoka Tano, Padawan to the celebrated Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker, the cold was a secondary concern. A dull ache that had long since been relegated to the back of her mind. The primary focus, the all-consuming reality, was the relentless, percussive beat of Blah. Stir fire that echoed through the ice-carved canyons, a deadly symphony that had been playing for 3 agonizing rotations. Her twin lightsabers, one a standard length with a vibrant green blade, the other a shorter Shoto-style blade of a yellowish green, hummed with a life that was a stark contrast to the death they so expertly dealt. They were extensions of her will, of her very being, moving in a dizzying, defensive dance that deflected the crimson bolts of energy back towards their source. The metallic clang of a successful parry was a small, fleeting victory in a battle that was rapidly turning into a rout. Around her, the men of the 501st Legion, their blue and white armor a stark beacon against the glittering ice, were falling. They had come to Ilum on what was supposed to have been a routine mission. Escort a group of Jedi initiates on their pilgrimage to the Crystal Caves, the sacred site where younglings found the kyber crystals that would become the heart of their lightsabers. It was a tradition as old as the Jedi Order itself, a rite of passage. But the Separatists, with a level of intelligence that was as surprising as it was terrifying, had known. They had sprung their trap with brutal efficiency. Their droid forces emerging from hidden crevasses in the ice, their numbers a seemingly endless tide of durasteel and murderous intent. The initiates were safe, for now, barricaded deep within the caves with Master Luminara Unduli, but the rest of them, Ahsoka and a platoon of clone troopers under the command of Captain Rex, were caught in a desperate fighting retreat. "Captain, what's our status?" Ahsoka's voice, though strained, was a clear, commanding alto that cut through the cacophony of the battle. She ducked under a sizzling bolt that melted a furrow in the ice wall behind her. The acrid smell of ozone and superheated water filling the air. Rex, his helmet adorned with the jag eyes that marked him as a seasoned veteran, was crouched behind a hastily formed barricade of ice and snow. "Not good, Commander," he grunted, his own blaster rifle spitting blue energy at the advancing droids. "We're down to half a platoon, and they're trying to flank us from the west ridge. We can hold this position for maybe another 10 minutes, tops." 10 minutes. It felt like a lifetime and no time at all. 10 minutes until their position was completely overrun. N minutes until the droids reached the caves and the initiates. The thought sent a jolt of icy fear through her, a fear that had nothing to do with the planet's frigid temperature. She was a Jedi, and Jedi were not supposed to be afraid. But she was also a commander, responsible for the lives of her men, and a protector, responsible for the future of the Order. The weight of it all was a physical pressure on her chest. "We need to fall back to the cave entrance," she decided, her mind racing through tactical possibilities, each one more bleak than the last. "Create a choke point. Buy Master Lu Manera more time to get the younglings to safety." "A choke point is just another word for a last stand, Commander," Rex said, his voice grim, but there was no hint of insubordination in it, only a stark assessment of their reality. He was right, of course. A last stand. Here, on this frozen, forgotten world. It was in that moment of despair, as the first of the B-2 super battle droids began to lumber around their flank. Its wrist-mounted cannons already glowing with malevolent intent, that something changed. It was not a change that could be seen, not at first. It was a feeling, a subtle shift in the energy of the world around them. The Force, which had been a maelstrom of fear and violence, a chaotic storm that mirrored the battle raging around them, suddenly, stilled. It was as if a great stone had been dropped into a raging sea, and in its wake, a profound, unnerving calm began to spread. The constant, psychic screaming of the kyber crystals, a background radiation of pain and presu. That only a force sensitive could perceive, a pain that had been amplified 1,000-fold by the violence being done on this sacred world, abruptly ceased. In its place was a hum, a deep, resonant thrum of power that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of her bones. It was a power unlike anything she had ever felt before. It was not the light side, nor was it the dark. It was something else, something older, something primordial. Then, she saw it. A flicker in the air, a distortion in the fabric of reality itself, coalescing in the heart of the canyon, directly between her beleaguered forces and the advancing droid army. It was a tear, a shimmering, silver-white rift that seemed to be woven from starlight and liquid moonlight. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. From within its depths, a figure emerged, stepping out of the rift and onto the frozen ground of Ilum as if he were stepping out for a casual stroll. He was tall, with a lean, powerful build that was evident even beneath the strange, dark clothing he wore. It was a simple, functional attire, a high-collared black tunic and matching pants, tucked into sturdy, dark boots. Over it, he wore a long, sleeveless coat of the same black material, lined with a deep, blood red. His hair was the color of sun-bleached wheat, a wild, spiky mane that seemed to defy gravity. But it was his face that captured her attention, that held her transfixed. It was a face that was both young and impossibly old, with high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and skin that seemed to have been kissed by the sun of 1,000 different worlds. On his cheeks were 3 faint, whisker-like marks, scars or tattoos, she couldn't tell. And his eyes, they were the color of the sky on a perfect summer day, a blue so deep and clear that it felt like she could fall into them and never find her way out. The droids, with their single-minded, programmatic focus, did not pause to appreciate the strangeness of the newcomer. They simply retasked, their metallic voices a chorus of monotone threats. New target identified, organic, hostile, open fire, a wave of crimson energy, a storm of blaster bolts that would have overwhelmed even a seasoned Jedi Master, converged on the lone figure. Ahsoka cried out, a wordless sound of warning, of horror. It was a futile gesture. No one could survive that. But the man did not move. He did not raise a hand in defense. He did not flinch. He simply stood there, his head tilted slightly, a look of mild curiosity on his face. And as the blaster bolts reached him, they stopped. They did not deflect. They did not dissipate. They simply ceased to be, their energy unraveling, dissolving into motes of shimmering, silver light that were absorbed into the air around him. It was as if the very concept of their existence had been erased from reality. Silence. A profound, ringing silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the whistling of the wind. The droids had stopped firing, their programming struggling to comprehend what their optical sensors were showing them. The clones, too, had ceased their barrage, their blasters lowered, their helmeted heads all turned towards the impossible man who stood unscathed in a field of dissipating light. The man, Naruto Uzumaki, drew in a long, slow breath, the frigid air of Ilum a welcome shock to his system. It had been a long time since he had felt anything so real. The transition between worlds, between realities, was always a disorienting, tumultuous affair, a violent tearing of the soul from one existence and a forceful grafting onto another. But the landing, for once, had been gentle. He had been drawn here, pulled across the void by a sound he had not heard in centuries, the weeping of a world's heart. The crystals, they pulsed with a life, a consciousness that was both familiar and alien. They were in pain, their song a discordant shriek of violation. And these things, these soulless automatons, were the cause. He turned his attention to them, his blue eyes sweeping over the ranks of droids, his gaze analytical, dissecting them layer by layer. They were crude, mass-produced instruments of death, nothing more. A plague upon this beautiful, wounded world. You are loud, he said, his voice calm, yet it carried an unnatural resonance, a weight that made the very air seem to vibrate. It was a voice that was accustomed to being obeyed, not by men or by armies, but by the fundamental laws of the universe itself. And you are hurting this place. That is unfortunate. He raised a hand, his fingers splayed. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic incantation. He simply willed it, and the Etherius, the primordial fire that was his birthright, the energy that was the wellspring of all creation, answered. From the ground beneath the droid army, spikes of pure, solid ice, as clear and as hard as diamond, erupted. They did not just impale the droids, they tore through them, shattering their metallic bodies with contemptuous ease. But it was not just ice. As the spikes rose, they began to glow with a soft, silver light, and the very structure of the droids began to change. The durasteel plating warped and twisted, its molecular bonds unraveling, transmuting into a brittle, crystalline substance that crumbled into dust in the wind. In the span of a single breath, the entire Separatist vanguard, hundreds of battle droids, super battle droids, and droidecas, was gone. Not destroyed in the conventional sense, but unmade. Erased from existence, leaving behind nothing but a fine, glittering powder that was scattered by the wind. Ahsoka stared, her mind reeling, her understanding of the universe tilting on its axis. What she had just witnessed was not the Force. It was something else entirely. The Force could lift rocks, it could guide a lightsaber. It could even, in the hands of a master, create lightning from its raw power. But it could not do this. It could not rewrite reality on such a grand, effortless scale. The man turned his gaze from the dust of the droid army to her and the clone troopers. There was no malice in his eyes, no threat. Only a calm, appraising look. He took a step towards them, and instinctively, Ahsoka raised her lightsabers, the green blades a stark line of defense against the impossible. The clones, their training kicking in, raised their rifles as well, a dozen blue beams painting a target on the man's chest. He paused, a slight, almost amused smile touching his lips. "You have spirit," he observed, his voice still carrying that strange, resonant quality. "And you are connected to the life of this world. Like the crystals, but different. More focused." He was talking about the Force. He could sense it in her. But he spoke of it as if it were a curious novelty, a child's toy. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it should have angered her, but it didn't. Because as she looked at him, as she felt the immense, ancient power that radiated from him in gentle, rhythmic waves, she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that he was not being arrogant. He was simply stating a fact. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice a little shakier than she would have liked. The man's smile widened slightly. "I am Naruto Uzumaki," he said, as if that explained everything. He took another step, and this time, no one fired. His presence was not aggressive, not hostile. It was calming. The storm in the Force that had been raging moments before was now a placid lake, and he was the center of it, the source of its tranquility. "And you are trespassing on a graveyard." Rex, ever the pragmatist, chose that moment to speak, his voice filtered through his helmet's comm system. "With all due respect, sir, this is a Republic-controlled world. We're not trespassing." Naruto's gaze shifted to the clone captain, and for a moment, Ahsoka felt a jolt of fear for her friend. But the man's expression was not one of anger. It was one of pity. "You believe you control this world?" he asked, his voice soft. "You are but mayflies, living out your brief, fleeting lives on the back of a sleeping giant. You do not control it. You merely inhabit it. For now." He gestured to the ice around them, to the towering spires and the deep, silent canyons. "This world is a tomb," he continued, his voice taking on a storyteller's cadence. "A monument to a forgotten age. The crystals you seek, the ones that sing to you, they are not mere stones. They are the echoes of a million souls, the last remnants of a people who learned to weave their spirits into the very fabric of their world. You come here and you take pieces of them, you place them in your weapons, and you call it a holy rite. It is grave robbery, of a sort." Ahsoka was stunned into silence. The origins of the Kyber crystals were lost to time, shrouded in myth and legend. But the way he spoke, with such quiet certainty, it felt true. It felt like a piece of a puzzle she had never even known was missing had just been slotted into place. "Who are you?" she asked again, her voice softer this time, her lightsabers still ignited but no longer held in a defensive posture. "What are you?" Naruto's gaze returned to her, and his eyes seemed to soften. He saw her, truly saw her, not as a soldier or a Jedi, but as a young woman, burdened with a war that was not of her making, fighting for a cause she only partially understood. He saw the flicker of doubt in her heart, the questions she was too afraid to ask, the weariness that clung to her like a shroud. He had seen it all before, 1,000 times, on 1,000 different worlds. I am a traveler, he said, his voice gentle. A remnant of a time long past. And I was drawn here by the sound of a world in pain. He looked up at the sky, at the faint, distant stars that glittered in the thin atmosphere. This galaxy, it is screaming. A chorus of 1,000,000,000 voices, all crying out in agony. It is a symphony of death and despair. He looked back at her, his blue eyes piercing. And you were one of the lead vocalists. Before Ahsoka could process that, before she could even begin to formulate a response, a new sound cut through the air. The high-pitched whine of starship engines. A flotilla of separatist ships, a half-dozen frigates and a command ship, broke through the thin cloud cover, their sinister, vulture-like silhouettes a promise of imminent death. Reinforcements. The droids on the ground had been just the first wave. Rex swore, a string of curses that were both creative and heartfelt. Commander, we need to get back to the caves, now. We can't fight that. But Naruto did not seem concerned. He merely looked up at the descending fleet, his expression one of mild annoyance, as if they were a swarm of pesky insects that had interrupted a pleasant conversation. More noise, he murmured, a sigh of resignation in his voice. It seems that in this universe, as in all the others, the loudest are always the most eager to die. He raised his hand again, but this time, he did not draw upon the power of the world beneath him. This time, he reached inward, to the boundless, infinite wellspring of the etherius that resided within his own soul. A silver flame, a light so pure and so intense that it seemed to cast the very stars into shadow, ignited in the palm of his hand. It did not burn with heat, but with a cold, absolute power. It was the light of creation. The fire that had birthed suns and forged galaxies. Be still, he commanded, his voice no longer human, but a chorus of 1,000,000 voices, a sound that was both a whisper and a roar. A sound that echoed across the ice plains and up into the heavens. And the universe obeyed. The separatist ships, which had been descending with all the arrogant menace of a predator swooping in for the kill, simply stopped. Their engines died, their lights flickered and went out, their weapon systems went cold. They hung in the sky, silent and dead, a fleet of metal coffins suspended between the heavens and the earth. Then, with a slow, deliberate clenching of his fist, the silver flame in his hand was extinguished. And in the sky above, the ships began to change. The dur-steel hulls warped and buckled. Not from an external force, but from an internal one. It was as if every single atom in their construction had suddenly decided to be somewhere else. The ships dissolved, their complex structures breaking down into their constituent elements, a rain of metallic dust and vaporized components that drifted down to the surface of Ilum like a gentle, glittering snow. In the span of 30 seconds, a fleet that could have laid waste to a continent had been unmade. Erased, as if it had never been. Ahsoka could only stare, her mouth agape, her mind a blank slate, wiped clean of all thought, all reason, all understanding. The clones around her were equally stunned, their silence a testament to the sheer, mind-breaking impossibility of what they had just witnessed. Naruto lowered his hand, a look of serene satisfaction on his face. The world was quiet now. The screaming had stopped. The crystals were humming, a gentle, soothing melody that was one of gratitude, of peace. He turned his attention back to the small group of soldiers and their young, Togruta commander. There, he said, his voice once again his own, the calm, resonant baritone that seemed to be his natural state. That's better. He offered them a small, reassuring smile, a smile that seemed to say that the casual annihilation of a battle fleet was a perfectly normal, everyday occurrence. Now, where were we? Ahsoka found her voice, though it was a mere whisper. You just... She couldn't finish the sentence. She couldn't give voice to the impossible. I tidied up, he finished for her, his smile widening. They were making a mess. He looked at her, his eyes twinkling with an ancient, knowing light. You have questions, I am sure. As do I. He gestured towards the entrance to the crystal caves, a dark, yawning maw in the side of the ice canyon. Perhaps we can find a warmer place to talk. This world, it is beautiful, but it is not what one would call hospitable. And with that, the strange, impossible man from another world, the man who had unmade an army and a fleet with a gesture and a thought, began to walk towards them, his footsteps silent on the snow, his presence a beacon of calm in a universe that had suddenly become a much larger, and much more frightening, place. Ahsoka Tano, for the first time in her life, had no idea what to do. So she did the only thing she could think of. She lowered her lightsabers, and she waited. Her life, the war, the galaxy itself, everything had just changed. And this man, this Naruto Uzumaki, was the reason why. The silence that followed was broken by Captain Rex, who, after a long, pregnant pause, finally managed to activate his comlink. His voice, when it came, was a masterpiece of understatement, a testament to the unflappable resolve of the Grand Army of the Republic's finest. General Kenobi, he said, his voice tight, you are not going to believe this. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Crystal Heart. The walk to the cave entrance was a journey through a dreamscape of impossibilities. A fine, silvery dust, the last physical remnant of a separatist battle fleet, drifted down from the heavens, coating the ice in a shimmering, ethereal layer. It was beautiful, like the first snowfall of a new season, and utterly terrifying. Each step taken by Ahsoka Tano crunched not just on frozen water, but on tea. He unmade atoms of warships and battle droids. The universe felt fragile, as if its fundamental laws had been revealed to be mere suggestions, easily ignored by the will of the man who walked calmly ahead of her. Naruto Uzumaki moved with a liquid grace that seemed entirely at odds with the frozen landscape. He was an island of warmth and life in a sea of sterile cold. The clones of the 501st, what remained of them, followed at a respectful distance, their helmeted heads turning constantly, scanning the skies, the ice cliffs, their training compelling them to seek a threat their minds could comprehend. They found none. The greatest power on this world was walking beside their commander, and he seemed, for the moment, content. Captain Rex walked shoulder to shoulder with Ahsoka, his blaster now holstered. His hand resting on the grip not out of readiness, but as a familiar, comforting weight in a world suddenly devoid of familiar things. Commander, Rex's voice was a low rumble, barely audible over the wind. What are we dealing with? Ahsoka shook her head, the movement stiff, her montrals feeling heavy. I don't know, Rex. I have no frame of reference for this. She gestured vaguely at Naruto, then at the sky, then at the glittering dust on the ground. The Force, it doesn't do this. This is something else. He feels calm, Rex noted, a statement of fact from a man who had spent his life reading the subtle cues of allies and enemies. Not like a Jedi, though. Their calm always feels practiced. His is just there. Like a mountain. A mountain. That was a good word for it. Immovable, ancient, and utterly indifferent to the scurrying of ants at its base. That was Naruto Uzumaki. As they reached the cavern's maw, a gaping wound in the glacier's side, the low, resonant hum that had replaced the psychic screaming grew stronger. It was a sound that vibrated deep within Ahsoka's chest, a melody of pure, untainted life. Naruto paused at the threshold, placing a hand on the ice wall beside the entrance. He closed his eyes, and for a long moment, simply stood there, breathing. They're afraid, he murmured, his voice soft. But they're singing again. A sad song, but a song nonetheless. He was speaking of the crystals, she knew. He felt them not as objects, but as a collective consciousness, a choir of sleeping souls. He opened his eyes and looked at her, a hint of something profound and sorrowful in their cerulean depths. They remember the silence, before the noise, before the war. Before Ahsoka could ask what he meant, a figure emerged from the shadows of the cave, bathed in the cool, blue-white light of a lightsaber. Master Luminara Unduli was the very picture of Jedi serenity, her olive skin and tattooed chin a familiar sight, yet her posture was rigid. Her knuckles white where she gripped her weapon. Her eyes, a piercing green, were fixed solely on Naruto. Behind her, a small cluster of younglings peeked out, their faces a mixture of fear and wide-eyed wonder. Commander Tano, report. Luminara's voice was as crisp and cold as the air around them, each word a carefully shaped shard of ice. What has transpired? The battle, it ceased. Master Luminara, Ahsoka began, struggling to find the words. The separatist forces have been neutralized. Luminara's gaze did not waver from Naruto. Define. Neutralized. Unmade. Rex supplied from beside Ahsoka, his voice flat. The droids. Their ships. He unmade them. The Jedi Master's carefully constructed composure finally cracked. Her eyes widened fractionally, the only outward sign of her shock. She looked from the clone captain to her fellow Jedi, searching for a sign of deception or madness. She found only a shared, bone-deep bewilderment. Her focus returned to Naruto, her lightsaber humming with a new intensity. A clear note of warning. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice now laced with the steel of a warrior. "Are you Sith, some forgotten creature of the dark side?" Naruto's expression was one of genuine, almost academic, curiosity. He tilted his head, studying the glowing blade she held pointed at his chest. "That light," he mused, ignoring her question entirely. "It is a piece of this world's soul, isn't it? Caged, forced into a singular purpose. How limiting." He met her gaze, his own eyes holding no malice, only a vast, ancient weariness. "The darkness you speak of, it is a shadow. And shadows are cast by light. To concern oneself with one while ignoring the other is to see only half of the picture. I am not interested in half pictures." His words were a dismissal, not of her, but of her entire philosophy, the bedrock upon which the Jedi Order was built. It was a casual dismantling of 1,000 generations of belief, and it left Luminara momentarily speechless. Into this void of stunned silence stepped one of the younglings, a small, inquisitive Rhodian boy with large, black eyes. "You made the bad things go away," the boy, a youngling named Petro, said. His voice filled with an innocent awe that cut through the tension like a warm knife through butter. "Are you a wizard?" Naruto's stern, contemplative expression melted away, replaced by a genuine, warm smile that transformed his face, making him look suddenly, startlingly young. He crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with the child. "Something like that, little one," he said, his voice gentle. "The world was hurting, so I asked it to be quiet for a little while." "You asked it?" A human girl, Katuni, whispered, her eyes wide. "Everything has a voice," Naruto explained, his gaze sweeping over the small, upturned faces of the initiates. "The wind, the water, the stone, even the light. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it." This was too much for Luminara. "That is not the way of the Force," she stated, her voice sharp, regaining her composure. She deactivated her lightsaber, the snap hiss of the blade retracting echoing the sudden return of tension in the cavern. "The Force is a current that flows through all things. We do not speak to it, we listen, and we allow it to guide our actions." "The river you listen to is but one stream in an ocean without shore," Naruto replied. Rising to his full height, he looked at the Jedi Master, his gaze patient, like a teacher explaining a complex concept to a stubborn student. "You have built your home on its banks, eh? And you have forgotten that the rest of the water exists. There are deeper currents, older tides." "Arrogance," Luminara countered, her chin held high. "The Jedi have studied the Force for 25,000 years. We know its nature. We know the peril of seeking power beyond its teachings. You have studied a single letter of a single word on a single page of a book that has no end," Naruto said, his voice still calm, but with an underlying weight that made the air feel thick. "You have not sought power. You have sought control. You have placed shackles on yourselves and called it piety. You have mistaken the cage for the universe." Ahsoka felt a strange thrill run through her. His words, heretical as they were, resonated with a hidden part of her, a part that had long chafed under the strictures of the Jedi Code. A part that had questioned the Order's rigid dogma in the quiet, lonely hours of the night. She looked at Naruto, at this man who spoke of oceans and endless books, and she felt not fear, but a dizzying sense of possibility. He represented a truth that was larger than the Jedi, larger than the Republic, larger than the entire, endless war. "You speak in riddles," Luminara said, her voice tight with disapproval. "You performed an act of immense power, an act of destruction on a scale that is unprecedented. You must be held accountable. You will return with us to Coruscant. The Jedi Council will decide what is to be done with you." Naruto chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from the depths of his chest. It was not a mocking sound. It was the sound of a being who had just heard something utterly, preposterously absurd. "You believe you can compel me?" he asked, a genuine question. "Your counsel, They are the ones who have lived on the riverbank the longest, are they not? I imagine their view is the narrowest of all. He turned away from the Jedi Master, his attention drawn to a small human girl with dark hair who was sitting off to the side, her head bowed in dejection. It was Ganodi. She had been unable to find her crystal, the Force remaining silent to her pleas. He walked over to her, his movements silent, and knelt before her. Your heart is quiet, he observed. His voice soft. You are trying to shout, so you cannot hear the whispers. Ganodi looked up, her eyes filled with tears of frustration. The Force won't speak to me, she mumbled. The crystal, it doesn't want me. The crystal does not know the Force, Naruto said gently. It knows the song of the world. It knows life, and it knows loss. It is a soul, like you. You are not trying to find a stone. You are trying to make a friend. He placed a hand on the ice floor. Close your eyes. Don't listen for a sound. Just listen to everything. The hum of the ice. The beat of your own heart. The breath of your friends. It is all one song. Hesitantly, Ganodi closed her eyes. Ahsoka watched, fascinated. This was not a Jedi technique. This was something else, something more intuitive, more fundamental. As the young girl sat in silence, a soft, green light began to emanate from a section of the cavern wall a few meters away. It grew brighter, a gentle, pulsing GL. Ow that seemed to be synchronized with the rhythm of Ganodi's breathing. A crystal, her crystal, was calling to her, not through the Force, but through a shared connection to the life that pulsed within the planet itself. A single tear traced a path down Ganodi's cheek as a smile of pure, unadulterated joy spread across her face. Ahsoka looked at Naruto, and her breath caught in her throat. He was not just a force of destruction. He was a creator, a nurturer, a guide. He had not used the Force to help the youngling. He had taught her a different way to listen, a different way to be. And in that moment, Ahsoka felt a pull towards him, a deep, resonant attraction that had nothing to do with tactics or philosophy. It was a pull towards his confidence, his certainty, the profound sense of peace that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a sun. He saw the universe not as a battlefield of light and dark, but as a symphony, and he was the conductor. The moment of tranquil discovery was shattered by the crackle of Rex's wrist comm. Generals, we have an incoming transmission from General Kenobi. It's Priority 1. Luminara straightened, her focus immediately shifting back to the war, to the familiar. Brutal reality she understood. Put him through, Captain. A holographic image of Obi-Wan Kenobi flickered into existence, his familiar, bearded face etched with concern. Master Luminara, Ahsoka, report. We lost all contact, and then we detected a massive energy spike from your location, unlike anything we've ever recorded. What is your status? What happened to the Separatist fleet? Luminara and Ahsoka exchanged a look, a silent, frantic conversation passing between them in a heartbeat. What do we say? How do we explain the impossible? It was Ahsoka who spoke first, her voice carefully measured. General Kenobi, we encountered heavier resistance than anticipated. But the threat has been dealt with. The initiates are safe. We are preparing for evacuation. Obi-Wan's holographic eyebrow rose. Dealt with. Ahsoka, our long-range scanners registered an entire battle group. How did you? He trailed off, his gaze seeming to notice something just out of the holoprojector's range. Is there someone else with you? Quote. Before anyone could answer, Naruto took a step forward, his form partially entering the holographic projection. He looked at the image of the Jedi Master with a serene, unreadable expression. Your galaxy is very loud, he stated simply. Obi-Wan was, for once in his life, utterly flabbergasted. He stared at the image of the strange man, his mind racing to place the face, the voice, the sheer, unadulterated confidence. I beg your pardon. He is a local, Luminara interjected quickly, her voice strained. A powerful force sensitive who assisted us. The situation is complicated. Master Kenobi, we will provide a full report upon our return. It was a weak explanation, a flimsy paper shield against a tidal wave of questions, but it was all they had. Obi-Wan looked from Luminara's tense expression to Ahsoka's wide-eyed, almost reverent gaze, and he knew that he was not being told even a fraction of the truth. But he was a wise man, and he knew when to push and when to wait. Very well, he said slowly, his eyes still trying to get a measure of Naruto. "We will dispatch a cruiser for your immediate evacuation. Kenobi out." The hologram vanished, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Luminara turned to Naruto, her expression a complex mask of suspicion, grudging gratitude, and profound unease. "You have made yourself a person of interest to the Jedi Council," she said. "Your anonymity is at an end." Naruto seemed unconcerned. He had turned his attention back to the cave entrance, his head tilted as if listening to a distant sound that only he could hear. The calm, serene expression on his face had vanished, replaced by a look of sharp, focused intensity. The air in the cavern grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. The joyful humming of the kyber crystals faltered, replaced by a low, fearful thrum. "Your friends are not the only ones who are curious," he said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper that sent a shiver down Ahsoka's spine. "The energy I released to quiet this world, it was a dinner bell. A beacon in a dark and hungry night." He looked at them, and for the first time, Ahsoka saw something in his eyes that was not calm, not weary, not gentle. It was the look of a predator, an ancient and powerful being who had recognized the scent of a rival hunter on the wind. "Something else is coming," he warned. "Something that is not made of metal and circuits. Something that feeds." Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Devourer's Gaze. The shift was not atmospheric, it was existential. One moment, the air in the cavern was merely cold, a simple physical property of a world made of ice. The next, it was predatory. The cold deepened, burrowing past the layers of clothing and clone armor, past skin and bone, to touch the very essence of the soul. It was a cold that did not freeze, but emptied. The gentle, life-affirming hum of the kyber crystals, which had been a song of gratitude just moments before, devolved into a single, high-pitched shriek of pure, undiluted terror. It was a sound that scraped along the inside of Ahsoka's skull, a psychic nail on a psychic chalkboard. The younglings, so recently filled with wonder and relief, whimpered and drew closer together, their small bodies trembling. Petro, the brave Rhodian boy, was now staring into the shadowed recesses of the cave, his large black eyes wide with a primal fear that had no place in one so young. Ketuni had her hands pressed to her temples, her expression one of agony. Ganodi, who had just found her connection to the world, was now pale and gasping, as if the very air had become a poison she was forced to breathe. The Force, which had been a calm lake under Naruto's influence, was now a roiling, black ocean, churning with a malevolence so profound it made the dark side feel like a petty tantrum in comparison. "Report." Luminara's voice was a whip crack of command, her Jedi discipline a shield against the encroaching dread. She ignited her lightsaber once more, its green blade casting a pool of reassuring light that seemed pitifully small against the encroaching, invisible darkness. "Captain, what are your men seeing?" "Nothing, General." Rex's voice was tight, strained. He and the other clones had formed a protective circle around the Jedi and the younglings, their rifles raised, their helmet-mounted scanners sweeping the area. No heat signatures, no movement on the scanners, no M fluctuations. Whatever this is, it's not on any spectrum we can read. But the men, they're feeling it. A few of the shinies are getting dizzy. It's like the worst case of combat fatigue I've ever seen, hitting all at once. Ahsoka fought to center herself, to find the calm that was the bedrock of her Jedi training. She reached out with the Force, trying to push back against the tide of fear, to create a bastion of tranquility for the younglings. It was like trying to hold back the sea with her bare hands. The fear was not an emotion being projected at them. It was a fundamental property of the presence that was now descending upon Ilum, as intrinsic to it as gravity. It was a null space, an absence that consumed all light, all warmth, all hope. "It is not a physical being," Naruto's voice cut through the rising panic, calm and clear as a bell. He had not moved from his spot near the cave entrance, but his entire demeanor had transformed. The gentle traveler was gone, replaced by a being of immense, focused power. His blue eyes seemed to glow with an internal luminescence, and the very air around him shimmered, distorting the light. The oppressive, soul-crushing cold did not seem to touch him. It was as if he existed in a separate reality, a bubble of his own making. It has no body to see, no engine to scan. It is a hunger, a shadow that has learned to eat. He turned his gaze from the cavern's maw to the assembled Jedi. You feel it through what you call the Force because the Force is the flow of life, and this thing is a predator of life. It is a tear in the fabric of existence, a mouth that opens to consume. It was drawn by the energy I released, a scavenger attracted to a feast. And now, it has smelled the appetizers. His eyes flicked to the terrified younglings. Luminara's face was a pale, taut mask of concentration. A psychic entity. We have encountered such beings before. The Dwumuchik of the Outer Rim, the mind leeches of Cathair. They can be shielded against. She closed her eyes, her hands falling into a meditative mudra. Padawan, join me. We will create a wall of light. We will shield the children. Your wall will be a paper lantern in a hurricane, Master Jedi, Naruto said, his voice devoid of mockery, a simple statement of fact. You are trying to build a dam in a river, but this is not a river. It is the tide of an empty ocean, and it does not flow through the world. It consumes it. Your light is its preferred food. As if to punctuate his words, Luminara let out a sharp gasp, her eyes flying open. A thin trickle of blood ran from her nose. It's feeding on my focus, she stammered, her composure finally breaking, replaced by a dawning horror. The more I push with the Force, the stronger it becomes. It is a void hunger, Naruto explained, his gaze now fixed on the darkness beyond the cave entrance, a darkness that was beginning to take on a physical quality, the shadows seeming to deepen, to coalesce. To writhe with a life that was the antithesis of life. You call it the Void. A parasite that latches onto the nexus of life and drains it dry. And you have brought it to a banquet. He gestured to the ice walls around them, to the countless kyber crystals embedded within. A planetary lattice of focused life energy. A smorgasbord. Ahsoka felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the entity. He was right. Every Jedi technique she knew, every defensive posture, every meditative state, involved drawing on the Force, on the light side. But if that very act was what fed this thing, then they were not just defenseless, they were its nourishment. Their every attempt to fight back would only make it stronger. What do we do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at Naruto, her twin lightsabers held loosely in her hands, the weapons suddenly feeling useless, like children's toys. Naruto finally turned his full attention to her. The look in his eyes was not one of fear, but of sharp, analytical assessment. He was not looking at a Padawan in need of rescue. He was looking at a potential asset, a tool for the task at hand. We do not build a wall, he said, his voice dropping into a lower, more commanding register. We build a fortress, and we do not fight the darkness. We remind this place what it is to be the light. He strode to the center of the cavern, his boots making no sound on the ice. He looked at Luminara, then at Ahsoka. Your connection to the Force is a liability, but your connection to the crystals, to the life of this world, that is a weapon. You have been taught to borrow their song, to cage a piece of it in your swords. I will teach you to join the choir. He knelt, placing one palm flat against the icy floor. Master Jedi, he said to Luminara, his tone respectful but firm, your discipline is a cage, but it has also given you a will of iron. I need that will. I need you to hold the line, not with the Force, but with your own spirit. Focus on one thing, and one thing only, protecting the children. Be the anchor. To Luminara, this was heresy. To abandon the Force, to rely on her own, mortal will. It was antithetical to everything she had ever been taught. But she had seen the impossible, she had felt the truth of his words as the Vord fed on her power, and she saw the unwavering certainty in his eyes. With a curt, reluctant nod, she moved to the center of the huddle of younglings, deactivating her lightsaber and closing her eyes, her face a mask of supreme concentration. Naruto's gaze then fell upon Ahsoka. You are different, he said, his voice softer. You are not as rigid. Your connection is more fluid, more intuitive. You will be the conduit. He extended his other hand to her. Give me your hand, Padawan Tano. And trust me. Ahsoka looked at his outstretched hand, then into his eyes. There was no room for doubt, no time for debate. The psychic shrieking of the crystals was growing more intense. The air thicker, colder. She could feel the Vord's presence coalescing just outside the cave, a monstrous, silent intelligence that was savoring its meal. She made a choice. It was not the choice of a Jedi, but of a warrior, of a protector. It was a choice to trust the impossible man over the dogma that had just been proven useless. She sheathed her lightsabers and placed her hand in his. His skin was warm, a startling contrast to the deathly chill of the cavern. The moment their hands touched, the universe exploded. It was not a violent explosion, but one of pure, overwhelming sensation. She was no longer Ahsoka Tano, standing in an ice cave on Ilum. She was the ice, she was the crystals, she was the planet itself, a vast, sleeping consciousness that had dreamed for millennia. She felt the weight of the glaciers, the slow, inexorable grind of their movement. She felt the heat of the planet's core, a fiery heart in a frozen body. And she felt the million souls of the Kyber crystals. A vast, silent chorus of spirits woven into the very fabric of the world. And through it all, she felt him. Naruto. He was not a part of the planet. He was a sun, a source, a wellspring of power so immense, so absolute, that the planet's life force was but a single, gentle note in his cosmic symphony. He was the Aetherius, the primordial flame of creation, and he was pouring a fraction of its essence into her, through her, and into the heart of Ilum. Do not fight the shadow, his voice echoed in her mind, not as words, but as pure concept, an idea that bloomed fully formed in her consciousness. Show it why it is a shadow. Remind it of the sun. He guided her, showing her how to take the raw, untamed life energy of the planet, the collective song of the crystals, and harmonize it with the sliver of primordial power he was lending her. It was not the Force. The Force was a tool, a current to be manipulated. This was participation. It was joining a song that had always been singing, and adding her own voice to it. Outside the cave, the shadows had begun to pour in like a black, viscous liquid. They had no form, but they suggested shapes in the corner of the eye, long, grasping tendrils. A gaping, toothless maw, 1,000 hungry eyes. The clones, seeing a visible, if incomprehensible, target, opened fire. Their blue blaster bolts struck the writhing darkness and simply vanished. Their energy consumed, adding to the Vord's power. Hold your fire. Rex's voice boomed over the comms. It's feeding on the energy. Fall back. Tighter perimeter. Inside the circle of clones. At the heart of the cavern, the light began. It started at the point where Naruto's hand rested on the floor, a soft, silver-white radiance that spread outwards in a perfect circle. It was not the green light of a lightsaber, nor the golden light of a sun. It was the pure, clean light of creation, and it carried with it an absolute, unshakable authority. As the light spread, the ice itself began to transform. Intricate, fractal patterns, like frost on a windowpane, bloomed across the floor, glowing with the same silver luminescence. The very air began to warm, soul-sucking cold retreating before the advance of this sacred geometry. Ahsoka, her eyes closed, felt it all. She was the conduit for this transformation. The power flowed through her, a torrent of life and light that would have vaporized her had Naruto not been there, a master conductor orchestrating the symphony, shielding her from the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of the energy she was channeling. She felt her own life force, her connection to the Force, being amplified, purified, reforged in this primordial fire. It was painful, and it was ecstatic. She was being unmade and remade, all at once. The shrieking of the crystals changed. The note of terror was still there, but beneath it, a new tone was rising, one of defiance, of hope, of rage. They were the souls of a powerful, ancient people, and they had been woken from their long slumber. The silver light, conducted through Ahsoka, fed by Naruto, and amplified by the planetary crystal lattice, erupted from the floor. It did not form a wall. It formed a reality. The cavern was no longer a cavern. For a radius of 100 meters, the ice, the rock, the very air had been overridden. They were standing in a sanctuary, a bubble of pure, undiluted creation. The walls were now woven from solid light, etched with glowing, geometric patterns that pulsed in time with a great, silent heartbeat. The air was warm, filled with the scent of ozone and blooming night flowers, a scent that had no business existing on a world of ice. The Vord's encroaching shadows slammed against the edge of this luminous dome and recoiled, sizzling and dissolving like water on a hot skillet. The shadow could not exist where there was no space for it. The hunger could not feed where there was no concept of decay. The Vord, for the first time in its eons of existence. Felt something akin to pain. It was the pain of a parasite that had attached itself to what it thought was a dying animal, only to find it was a star. It let out a silent, psychic scream of fury and frustration. A wave of pure malevolence that washed against the dome of light. Inside, the clones stumbled, gritting their teeth. Luminara, her face beaded with sweat, cried out, a tremor running through her body. Ahsoka felt the impact as a physical blow, and her connection wavered. Hold, Naruto's thought was a pillar of steel in her mind. It is a beast, and all beasts can be taught to fear. He shifted his focus. A portion of the power that had been sustaining the sanctuary was diverted. He did not look at the Vord. He did not acknowledge it directly. Instead, he looked up, through the ceiling of light, through the thousands of feet of ice above them, to the cold, dark space beyond. And he pulled. High above Ilum, in the silent, unforgiving vacuum of space, a pinprick of light appeared. It was not a star. It was a tear in the void, a new ethereous rift. And from it, a single, perfect spear of silver-white energy, no thicker than a man's arm, shot downwards. It did not burn the atmosphere. It did not announce its arrival with a sonic boom. It simply arrived. The spear of light struck the glacier a mile away from the cave, and it did not stop. It passed through the ice as if it were not there, its passage leaving behind a perfectly cauterized, glowing tunnel. It plunged deep into the planet's crust, into the planetary heart, the focal point of the entire Kyber crystal network. And then, Naruto pushed. The entire planet of Ilum became a weapon. From the point of impact, a wave of pure, silver-white life energy erupted, traveling through the crystal lattice, turning the entire world into a colossal resonator. The planet did not just glow, it shone. From orbit, it would have looked as if a new star had been born in the Ilum system. On the surface, every single Kyber crystal, from the smallest shard to the largest formation, blazed with an unbearable, incandescent light. The song of the crystals was no longer a scream or a whisper, it was a cosmic roar of defiance, a singular, unified note of pure, unadulterated life. The Vord, which had been pressing against the sanctuary, was caught in the heart of this planetary detonation of life energy. Its shadowy, amorphous form was seared, its very essence set alight by the one thing it could not consume, the one concept that was anathema to its existence. Its silent, psychic scream became one of genuine, unadulterated agony as it was forcibly, violently overfed. Its hunger, which had been its weapon, was now its undoing. It could not stop eating, and it was being force-fed a sun. With a final, soul-wrenching shriek that echoed in the minds of every living thing on the planet, the Vord's presence shattered, its essence scattered to the void, a lesson in terror branded into its very being. As quickly as it had begun, it was over. The light receded, the planet's incandescent glow fading back to its normal, icy sheen. The spear of light from the heavens vanished. The dome of light in the cavern dissolved, leaving behind only the normal, frozen ice, the scent of phantom flowers, and a profound, ringing silence. Ahsoka collapsed, her connection to Naruto and the planet severed. Her body felt like it had run 100 marathons, every muscle aching, every nerve ending frayed. But her mind was clear, sharp, and humming with a residual power that made her feel more alive than she had ever been. Captain Rex and another trooper were at her side in an instant, helping her to her feet. "Commander, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Rex," she breathed, her voice hoarse. "I'm more than fine." Her gaze went to Naruto. He stood in the center of the cavern, his hand no longer on the floor, looking as calm and unruffled as if he had just been out for a leisurely walk. But there was a new light in his eyes, a glint of something hard and dangerous. He had not just repelled the threat, he had delivered a warning. Luminara unduly slowly got to her feet, her movements stiff. She stared at Naruto, her face a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Her entire life, her entire belief system, had been predicated on the idea that the Jedi way was the only way to combat true darkness. In the space of an hour, this man had shown that belief to be laughably, dangerously inadequate. He had faced a darkness that would have consumed her and the entire Jedi Order, and he had banished it, not with quiet meditation or controlled aggression, but with an overwhelming, majestic assertion of pure existence. He had not fought the shadow, he had erased it by turning on a sun. She looked at him, not as a heretic, not as a potential threat to be contained, but as a force of nature, a being whose power and understanding were so far beyond her own that she could not even begin to comprehend them. The suspicion in her eyes was still there, but it was now dwarfed by a profound, grudging, and utterly overwhelming sense of awe. And beneath that awe, something else stirred. A flicker of attraction, not for the man himself, but for the sheer, absolute competence he represented. He was the answer to a question she had not even known she should be asking. Naruto's gaze swept over them, lingering for a moment on Ahsoka with a look of approval that made her heart skip a beat. Then he looked towards the cave entrance. The low whine of a starship's engines began to filter in from outside. "Your ride is here," he said, his voice once again calm and even. "It seems the galaxy is not quite finished with being loud today." As the familiar silhouette of a Republic light cruiser filled the sky above the canyon, Ahsoka Tano knew that nothing would ever be the same again. They had survived the droids, and they had survived the Vord. Now, they had to face the Jedi Council. And she knew, with a CERTAINTY that was as absolute as the power she had just touched, that she would be standing with the man who commanded the sun. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Stillness of the Crucible. The transition was a violent form of sensory whiplash. One moment, they were on Ilum, a world of primordial silence and cosmic power, where the very ice beneath their feet had become a weapon of impossible light. The next, they were encased in the sterile, metallic womb of the Republic light cruiser, the Vigilance. The air here was not the razor-thin, life-stealing cold of the sacred planet, but a bland, recycled atmosphere that hummed with the monotonous drone of life support and tasted faintly of ionized particles and lubricants. The profound silence of a vanquished void had been replaced by the ceaseless, almost subliminal thrum of the sublight engines, a constant reminder of the galaxy's obsession with motion, with purpose, with war. For Naruto Uzumaki, it was like being lowered into a coffin of intricate, pointless machinery. He stood near the viewport in the main hangar bay, watching the brilliant, star-dusted tapestry of space slide by. The ship was a marvel of engineering, a crucible of technology designed for the sole purpose of delivering death to other parts of the galaxy. It was a testament to the ingenuity and the utter, tragic lack of imagination of the beings who had built it. They had conquered the physics of their dimension, bent light and time to their will, and had used that mastery to build better, faster, more efficient ways to kill one another. It was a pattern he had seen repeated across countless realities. A cosmic refrain of self-destruction that was as predictable as it was disheartening. He could feel the minds of the crew, a chaotic symphony of 1,000 different thoughts and emotions. There was the focused discipline of the clone troopers, a near hive mind of shared purpose and ingrained training, now shot through with threads of confusion and awe. They kept their distance from him, their helmeted gazes following his every move, their thoughts a jumble of words like anomaly, power source, and the occasional, deeply buried flicker of something akin to religious reverence. They were soldiers, and they had witnessed a force that had rendered their entire concept of warfare obsolete. They did not know what to make of him, so they treated him as would an unexploded bomb, with a great deal of respect and a very wide berth. Then there were the Jedi. Luminara Unduli had sequestered herself in a small meditation chamber, though Naruto could feel that she was not meditating. Her mind was a fortress under siege, her disciplined thoughts a shield wall against a tidal wave of doubt. She was replaying the events in the ice cavern over and over, trying to fit the square peg of his existence into the round hole of her 25,000 years of Jedi doctrine. The hole was beginning to splinter. Ahsoka Tano was a stark contrast. She was a whirlwind of energy, a supernova of questions and nascent possibilities. Her mind was not a fortress, but a field of fertile soil that had just been struck by lightning. Something new and powerful was beginning to grow there. She was currently with the younglings, who were in the ship's small medical bay being checked over. Their minds were the clearest of all, their fear of the Vord already fading, replaced by a simple, unshakable belief. They had met a real-life storybook wizard. A pair of measured footsteps approached from behind, their sound a familiar cadence of calm, deliberate purpose. Naruto did not need to turn to know who it was. The Force, or what this universe called the Force, flowed around this man like a well-worn cloak, comfortable, familiar, and deceptively simple. The view is quite something, isn't it? Obi-Wan Kenobi said, his voice a smooth, pleasant baritone. He came to stand beside Naruto at the viewport, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture of relaxed readiness. I've spent half my life staring out of windows like this one. You'd think I'd be tired of it by now. It's a pretty cage, Naruto replied, his gaze still fixed on the stars. But a cage nonetheless. Obi-Wan allowed himself a small, thoughtful smile. A matter of perspective, I suppose. Some might see it as a vessel, a means to travel from one place to the next, to bring aid, to uphold justice. To carry weapons from one battlefield to another, Naruto countered, his voice even, not accusatory, but stating a simple, observable fact. He finally turned his head, his cerulean eyes meeting Obi-Wan's calm, gray-blue gaze. Your galaxy is dying, Master Kenobi. You are the ferryman, and you are so busy rowing you have forgotten to notice that your passenger is already dead. The Jedi Master's smile did not waver. But there was a new sharpness in his eyes, a glint of the keen, analytical mind that lay beneath the affable exterior. A grim diagnosis. And who, might I ask, is the physician offering it? Just a traveler, Naruto said, turning fully to face him. One who has seen this particular sickness before. They stood in silence for a long moment, a silent duel of wills fought not with weapons or with the Force, but with sheer presence. Obi-Wan was a master of this game. He could unnerve senators and disarm warlords with nothing more than a raised eyebrow and a carefully chosen word. But Naruto was not playing a game. He simply was. His calm was not a practiced technique, it was the fundamental state of his being. It was like trying to disconcert an ocean by skipping a stone across its surface. Master Luminara and my Padawan have given me their preliminary report, Obi-Wan began, his tone carefully neutral. It is, you must admit, somewhat difficult to reconcile with our understanding of, well, of anything, really. They speak of an army of droids and a fleet of warships being unmade. Of a psychic entity that fed on the Force itself. Of the entire planet. Of Ilum being turned into a beacon of light. He stroked his beard, a classic gesture of thoughtful contemplation. These are not events that fit neatly into a standard mission report. Your repo, RTS are designed to catalog the predictable, Naruto stated. The universe is not. Indeed, Obi-Wan conceded. And at the center of this unpredictability is you. A man who appears from nowhere, who wields a power we cannot define. And who speaks of our galaxy as if it were a patient on its deathbed. You must understand, from our perspective, this raises a great many questions. He paused, his gaze intensifying. The most pressing of which is, what are you? A new manifestation of the dark side. A being from beyond the known galaxy. The Council will want answers. The Council, Naruto said. The words tasting like dust in his mouth. The old men and women who have sat on the riverbank for so long they believe they are the ocean. They will ask me if I am of the light or of the dark, as if a star could be asked to choose between its fire and its shadow. They will not be asking for answers, Master Kenobi. They will be asking for a box to put me in. And I do not fit in boxes. The absolute, unshakable certainty with which he spoke was staggering. It was not arrogance. It was the simple, unvarnished truth of his existence. He was not a piece on the board, he was a different game entirely. Obi-Wan felt a sliver of the same profound, reality-bending vertigo that he had sensed in Luminara and Ahsoka. The Jedi Order was built on a foundation of balance, of light versus dark, of order versus chaos. Naruto was proposing that the foundation itself was nothing but a speck of dust on a far larger, more complex landscape. And yet, here you are, Obi-Wan pressed gently. On a Republic cruiser, on your way to Coruscant. You could have vanished as easily as you appeared. Why did you stay? Naruto's gaze softened for the first time, a flicker of something ancient and weary in his eyes. He looked past Obi-Wan, his gaze settling on the doorway to the hangar, where Ahsoka Tano had just appeared. She stood there, watching them, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of defiance and curiosity. Because for the first time in a very long time, Naruto said, his voice a low, resonant murmur, I heard a song I had not heard before. He looked back at Obi-Wan. Your Padawan. She is different. She has not yet forgotten how to listen to the rest of the music. The intensity of his stare, the weight of his words, seemed to create a connection between the three of them, a triangle. Of unspoken understanding that filled the hangar bay. Obi-Wan looked at his Padawan, at the fierce, independent spirit that he had tried so hard to nurture within the strict confines of the Jedi Code, and he understood. Naruto was not a threat to the galaxy. He was a threat to the status quo. And for a rebellious soul like Ahsoka, that was not a threat, it was a promise. Later, as the Vigilance carved its silent path through the endless night of hyperspace, Ahsoka found Naruto in the ship's small, seldom used arboretum. It was a sterile, pathetic attempt to replicate nature, a collection of potted plants from a dozen different worlds arranged under the pale, artificial glow of a full-spectrum lamp. Naruto was standing before a pot containing a single, drooping blossom, its petals a faded, listless purple. He had a hand extended over it, and from his palm, a single drop of liquid, as clear and as brilliant as a diamond, fell onto the plant's soil. Instantly, the flower began to transform. The drooping stem straightened, its color deepening from a sickly yellow-green to a vibrant, healthy emerald. The faded petals swelled with life, their color shifting to a purple so deep and so rich it seemed to drink the light. A faint, silver luminescence, the same light she had seen in the ice cavern, pulsed from the plant, and a sweet, intoxicating fragrance filled the small room. "How did you do that?" Ahsoka asked, her voice hushed with awe. Naruto retracted his hand, turning to her with a small smile. "Everything is a song, Ahsoka. This little one had just forgotten its own tune. I just hummed a few bars to remind it." "That was more than humming," she said, stepping closer. She could feel the life radiating from the flower, a vibrant, joyful pulse in the force that had not been there a moment before. "That was like on Ilum. The light, the ethereus," he corrected her gently. "The light, the dark, they are echoes of the first sound. This is the sound itself." He looked at her, his gaze direct, appraising. "You felt it, you held it, a part of it is in you now." She knew he was right. She felt different. The force was still there, the familiar current she had known her whole life. But now she could feel something else, something deeper, beneath it. It was like she had spent her life listening to a single instrument, and now she was beginning to hear the rest of the orchestra. "The council," she said. The words coming out in a rush. "They won't understand. They'll see you as a threat. They'll try to imprison you, or worse. They will try," Naruto agreed, his voice calm. "And they will fail. Their power is based on control, Ahsoka. Control of themselves, control of others, control of the Force. But the universe does not want to be controlled. It wants to be experienced. Their cage is of their own making, and they have forgotten that the door is not locked." He took a step closer to her, and the air between them seemed to crackle with an unseen energy. It was not the impersonal, overwhelming power he had displayed on Ilum, but something more focused, more intimate. It was the charisma of a being who was so completely, so utterly comfortable with himself that it drew others in like a gravitational pull. "You are not like them," he said, his voice a low murmur that sent a shiver down her spine. "You wear the chains of their order, but you have not yet allowed them to rust shut. The question you must ask yourself is not what they will do to me. It is what you will do when they ask you to help them turn the key." His proximity was intoxicating. It was not a romantic or a physical attraction in the conventional sense, but a pull of her very spirit towards his. He was a supernova of potential, of freedom, of a truth so profound it made her entire life feel like a half-remembered dream. He saw the warrior in her, the rebel, the seeker, and he did not judge it or fear it. He affirmed it, and in that moment, she knew that if the time came, she would not help them turn the key. She would help him tear the door from its hinges. Their intense moment was interrupted by a crisp, formal cough. They turned to see Luminara Unduli standing in the doorway. Her posture as rigid and as perfect as ever, but her eyes held a new, unsettling depth. She looked from Ahsoka's flushed, intense expression to Naruto's calm, unreadable face, and a flick of something unidentifiable passed through her gaze. "Forgive my intrusion," she said, her voice the epitome of Jedi control. "I was hoping to have a word with our guest." Ahsoka felt a sudden, sharp pang of something she could only identify as jealousy. It was a petty, possessive emotion, unworthy of a Jedi, but it was there nonetheless. She wanted to stay, to continue her conversation with Naruto, to bask in the light of his presence. But Luminara was a master, and her tone, though polite, was a clear dismissal. With a reluctant nod, Ahsoka excused herself, casting one last look at Naruto before she left the Arboretum. Luminara stepped into the room, her gaze falling upon the miraculously revitalized flower. She looked at it for a long moment before turning her attention to Naruto. "You are a creator as well as a destroyer," she observed, her voice a flat, neutral tone. "They are two sides of the same coin," Naruto replied simply. "To create a sculpture, one must destroy the stone." An apt metaphor, Luminara conceded. She moved to the center of the room, her hands clasped behind her back. She did not look at him, but at the various plants, her expression unreadable. "On Ilum, I felt my connection to the Force being used as a weapon against me. And then, you told me to let it go. To rely on my own will. A concept that is antithetical to my training." She finally turned to face him, her green eyes piercing. "And yet, it worked. In that moment, holding my focus on the children, I felt a strength that was mine. It was not borrowed from the Force. It was not granted by the Order. It was mine. The Force is a tool," Naruto said. "A powerful one, but a tool nonetheless. You have spent your life identifying with the hammer, so you have forgotten the strength of the arm that swings it." "And you?" she asked, taking a half-step closer. "What are you? You speak of songs and oceans, you remake living things with a touch, you unmake fleets with a thought. You are not a Jedi. You are not a Sith. You are an impossibility, and impossibilities are dangerous, only to those who fear the unknown," he countered. "I do not fear it," Luminara stated, and in that moment, Ahsoka would have recognized the same dangerous spark of attraction that she herself felt, but from a different angle. Ahsoka was drawn to Naruto's promise of freedom. Luminara, the master of control, was drawn to his absolute, unassailable power. He was a challenge to her entire existence, an entity so far beyond her that her first instinct, to control and contain, was rendered utterly moot. And in that powerlessness, there was a terrifying, seductive kind of liberation. "I seek to understand it. Your power, it is absolute. It is the kind of power the Jedi have feared for millennia, the kind of power that corrupts, that consumes. That leads to the dark side. The dark side is a child's nightmare," Naruto said, his voice laced with an ancient pity. "It is the fear of losing control. I am control, Master Jedi. Not of others, of myself. The universe does not corrupt me, because I am a universe unto myself." He met her gaze, and in that moment, he was not just speaking to the Jedi Master. He was speaking to the woman. To the disciplined, controlled, and deeply burdened soul that she had encased in the armor of her Jedi rank. He saw her, the real her, and the intensity of that perception was like a physical blow. Her carefully constructed walls of discipline and dogma trembled, and for the first time since she was a youngling, Luminara unduly felt a profound, terrifying sense of uncertainty. And it was the most exhilarating thing she had ever experienced. Their standoff was interrupted by the chime of the ship-wide intercom, followed by the voice of Captain Rex. "General Kenobi, Master Unduli, Commander Tano. Please report to the bridge. We've received a Priority 1 directive from the Jedi Council. We're being ordered to rendezvous with the Third Fleet flagship, the Negotiator. They're sending an escort to meet us." A new player was being added to the board. The Council was not content to wait. They were moving to contain the situation, to reassert their control. As Naruto, Luminara, and a newly arrived Ahsoka made their way to the bridge, they could feel the galaxy beginning to react to the ripple that had been sent out from Ilum. When they arrived on the bridge, Obi-Wan was already conversing with a holographic image. It was a striking Twi'lek woman with brilliant blue skin, her head tails draped gracefully over her shoulders. She wore the traditional garb of a Jedi Knight, and her face was a mask of serene, professional focus. But her dark, intelligent eyes betrayed a sharp, penetrating curiosity as they flickered towards the figures entering the bridge. This was Jedi Knight Ayla Secura. "Our orders are to transfer that anomaly to my custody, General Kenobi," Ayla was saying, her voice smooth and melodic, but with an underlying core of steel. "The Council wishes for a more secure escort to Coruscant." The subtext was clear. They did not trust Obi-Wan, a known maverick, or Luminara and Ahsoka, who were clearly under the anomaly's influence, to handle the situation. They were sending one of their most trusted and capable knights to take control. Obi-Wan glanced at Naruto, a wry, almost apologetic look in his eyes. Of course, Knight Sakura. We will be awaiting your arrival. The hologram vanished. The bridge was silent, save for the hum of the ship. Ahsoka stood protectively near Naruto. Luminara stood a few feet away, her expression a complex mixture of Jedi duty and a new personal uncertainty. Obi-Wan stroked his beard, his mind already working through a dozen different political and tactical scenarios. Naruto alone seemed utterly unconcerned. He had turned his attention to the main view screen, where a new shape was resolving out of the swirling blue vortex of hyperspace. A Republic attack shuttle, sleek and purposeful, was decelerating to match their velocity. More company, Naruto murmured, a faint, amused smile playing on his lips. They are so very eager to put me in their box. He looked at the 3 Jedi who stood near him, each of them now bound to him by threads of awe, curiosity, and a dangerous, burgeoning attraction. They should have brought a bigger box. The airlock hissed as the shuttle docked. The stage was being set. The actors were assembling, and as Ayla Sakura prepared to step aboard the Vigilance, she had no idea that she was not coming to take custody of a prisoner, but to become a student. In a classroom where the first lesson was that the entire galaxy was a lie. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Gilded Cage and the Hunter's Gambit. The hiss of the docking tube retracting was a sound of finality. Of a decision made and a path irrevocably chosen. Jedi Knight Ayla Sakura stepped onto the deck of the Vigilance, and the atmosphere on the bridge, already thick with unspoken tensions, solidified. She was a living work of art and a lethal weapon, all in one fluid form. Her blue Twi'leki skin seemed to absorb the ship's sterile lighting and reflect it back with a vibrant, organic warmth. Her movements were a dancer's, full of a liquid grace that belied the coiled steel of the warrior beneath. She carried herself with an air of serene confidence, her dark eyes missing nothing, cataloging the positions of the clone officers. The weary slump of Obi-Wan Kenobi's shoulders, the defiant tilt of Ahsoka Tano's chin, and the rigid, conflicted posture of Luminara Unduli. Her gaze, however, as inevitably drawn to the still point in the turning world, the blonde-haired man who stood near the main view screen, watching her approach with an expression of mild, detached curiosity. She felt him in the Force, but it was like feeling a mountain. She knew it was there, a vast and immovable presence, but she could not sense its shape, its texture, its heart. He was a void and a plenum all at once, a paradox that her Jedi senses, honed over years of tracking and infiltration, could not resolve. Master Kenobi, Ayla said, her voice a melodic alto, respectful but firm. She gave a slight bow, a formality that was both a greeting and an assertion of her authority. The Council sends its regards. I am here to assume command of the asset. The word hung in the air, cold and impersonal. Asset, a thing to be managed, utilized, and contained. Ahsoka bristled, her hand instinctively moving to the hilt of her lightsaber before a calming glance from Obi-Wan stayed the motion. Knight Sakura, Obi-Wan returned the bow, his expression one of weary diplomacy. Your arrival is prompt. Allow me to introduce you. This is Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto gave a slight inclination of his head, a gesture Hat was somehow both polite and dismissive. I have been called many things, Knight Sakura, he said, his resonant voice filling the bridge with a quiet authority. Asset is a new one. It lacks a certain creativity. Ayla's professional smile did not falter. She was used to dealing with powerful, egotistical individuals. My apologies if the term offends. It is a classification, nothing more. A way for the Council to categorize the unknown. That is their problem, Naruto replied, turning his gaze back to the star-dusted void beyond the viewport. They spend so much time building categories that they have forgotten how to look at the thing itself. It was a verbal parry of exquisite skill, and Ayla felt a flicker of genuine professional respect. He had taken her attempt to establish control and turned it into a philosophical critique of her entire order. She changed tactics. Your abilities, as described in the preliminary report, are considerable. The Council believes they could be of great service to the Republic in this time of war. I am not a soldier, Naruto stated simply. And yet you destroyed an entire separatist fleet, Ayla countered smoothly. An act that saved the lives of 2 Jedi and a platoon of clone troopers. Whether you call yourself a soldier or not, you have already chosen a side in this conflict. I did not choose a side, Naruto said, turning to face her fully. A flicker of something cold and ancient passed through his eyes. I chose silence over noise. The droids and their ships were loud, so I made them quiet. Do not mistake a desire for peace with an endorsement of your war. Ayla felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's life support. This was not an ego she was dealing with. It was a perspective so vast, so alien, that it rendered the entire galactic conflict, the defining event of her generation, into a petty squabble, an irritating background hum. The sheer scale of that perception was both terrifying and, to a mind like hers that was constantly seeking the bigger picture, profoundly fascinating. Before she could formulate a response, the holographic projector on the command table chirped to life. The stern, dark-skinned face of Jedi Master Mace Windu solidified in the blue light. His expression was grim, his gaze sweeping over the assembled Jedi before settling on Naruto, a long, unreadable stare. Knight Sakura, you have arrived. Windu's voice was a low, powerful baritone that commanded attention. Your orders have changed. You are not returning to Coruscant. Not yet. He looked at Obi-Wan. General Kenobi, set a course for the Tethan Spire in the Braxant sector. You are to rendezvous with the senator from the corporate hegemony. The situation has become critical. Obi-Wan straightened, his diplomatic weariness replaced by the sharp focus of a military commander. The hegemony negotiations. I thought Senator Amidala was handling that. The separatists have escalated their efforts, Windu explained, his gaze hard. We have credible intelligence, confirmed by our best assets, of a high-level assassination plot against Chancellor Javax. If he dies, the hegemony, and its considerable fleet and resources, will fall into separatist hands. The Council has decided that this mission requires a unique form of security. His eyes moved back to Naruto. The entity with you has demonstrated an unprecedented capacity for destructive and defensive power. Its presence will ensure the Chancellor's safety until the treaty is signed. The unspoken order was clear. They were to use Naruto as a bodyguard, a living, breathing deterrent. Ayla saw the strategic logic, but a part of her, the part that had just been verbally dissected by the asset, knew that this was a monumental miscalculation. You did not ask a hurricane to guard a candle flame. Master Windu, Ahsoka spoke up, her voice tight with indignation. You can't just order him to be a shield. He's not a Republic weapon. He is a power that has interfered in a Republic matter. Padawan Tano, Windu replied, his voice cold as stone. And until we determine the nature and origin of that power, he will act in the Republic's interests. That is the will of the Council. The hologram vanished, leaving behind a heavy, strained silence. Naruto, who had listened to the entire exchange with an expression of detached amusement, finally let out a soft chuckle. Your council is very confident in their authority, he mused. He looked at Ayla. Tell me, Knight Sakura, what does a hunter do when their masters command them to leash a storm? The question was for her. And she knew it. It was a test. A wise hunter, Ayla replied, her voice smooth as silk, observes the storm, learns its nature, and advises her masters on the folly of their commands. But she is still, at the end of the day, a hunter. And she follows her orders. It was the perfect Jedi answer, a balance of wisdom and obedience. And it was a complete lie. In that moment, Ayla Sakura's mission had changed. The council wanted a courier. Ayla, the information gatherer, the spy, now had a new objective, to understand the storm. The Tethan Spire was a needle of shimmering, iridescent metal and crystal that pierced the swirling, lavender clouds of the gas giant Teth. It was not a planet or a station, but a single, impossibly tall city, a vertical world of unimaginable wealth and calculated neutrality. Its heart was the Axiom, a massive, disc-shaped city hub that glittered with the lights of 1,000 casinos, luxury apartments, and diplomatic enclaves. It was the antithesis of Ilum's sacred silence and the Vigilance's sterile functionality. The Axiom was a symphony of glorious, decadent noise. As they disembarked into a private, high-level reception area, they were assaulted by a wave of sensory information. The air, thick with 100 different exotic perfumes, carried the sound of tinkling chimes, the murmur of a dozen alien languages, and the distant, seductive pulse of a syncopated rhythm from a casino floor. The walls were holographic, displaying an endless, slow-motion ballet of celestial nebulae. The floor was polished black obsidian, reflecting the chaos of light above like a dark, still pool. Their host, Chancellor Javax, was a tall, gaunt moon whose placid, elongated face betrayed no emotion, but his dark, intelligent eyes darted nervously, constantly scanning the crowd of aides and guards around them. "Master Jedi, your arrival is a great relief," he said, his voice a dry, reedy whisper. "These separatist threats, they are a vulgar negotiating tactic. But one must take them seriously." As Obi-Wan and Luminara engaged the Chancellor in the careful, diplomatic dance of galactic politics, Ayla and Ahsoka took up positions as observers, their Jedi training making them fade into the background. Naruto, however, did not fade. He simply stood, a point of absolute stillness in the swirling current of the Axiom's life, and he watched. He was not looking at the people, at the holographic walls, or the opulent decor. He seemed to be looking at the space between things, listening to a sound no one else could hear. "What do you think he's doing?" Ahsoka whispered to Ayla, her distrust of the blue Twi'lek having been temporarily superseded by their shared, bewildering circumstance. "I don't know," Ayla admitted. Her eyes narrowed in concentration as she watched Naruto. "When I use the Force to sense the room, I feel the Chancellor's fear, the guard's alertness, the general avarice from the lower levels. It's a cacophony. When I look at him, he looks like he's listening to a clear and simple melody." "He calls it a song," Ahsoka said quietly. "He says everything is a song, and that the war is just noise. A song, a melody." Ayla filed the information away. It was a metaphor, but it was also a clue to the nature of his perception. He did not read the Force. He perceived something more fundamental. And if the universe was a song, then a killer, a hunter with intent, would be a discordant note. A sour chord in the melody. A strategic advantage beyond measure. Her fascination with him deepened, taking on a new, sharper edge. It was the fascination of an intelligence operative who had just stumbled upon the ultimate code-breaking machine. The assassination attempt came, as they always do, at a moment of manufactured calm. The Chancellor was hosting a grand gala in his penthouse suite, a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the majestic, swirling clouds of Teth. The elite of the corporate hegemony mingled with Republic diplomats, their laughter and conversation a polite, civilized veneer over the simmering tensions of the galaxy. Ayla was a shadow, her dancers, grace allowing her to move through the crowd unnoticed, her senses spread out like a net, searching for any ripple in the Force, any sign of aggression. Ahsoka and Luminara were doing the same, a triangle of vigilant Jedi protectors. Captain Rex and a squad of his best men, dressed in formal guard uniforms that did little to hide their combat-honed bodies, secured the perimeter. They were the best in the galaxy at what they did, and they were all looking in the wrong direction. Naruto had not moved from a small, quiet balcony, seemingly engrossed in the view. But as a serving droid approached, the Chancellor with a tray of iridescent cocktails, he turned his head slightly, his gaze not on the droid, but on a Twi'lek dancing girl on the far side of the room. "The music is about to change," he murmured, his voice so low that only Ahsoka, who had drifted near him, could hear. Ayla, her senses screaming that something was wrong, saw it a split second later. The serving droid was not just a droid. There was a flicker of life in it, a brief, hostile spike in the Force. But her attention was drawn to a more obvious threat. A Gand bounty hunter, his insectoid face hidden behind a respirator, was raising a small, silenced hold-out blaster from beneath his cloak, aiming it directly at the Chancellor's back. As Ayla ignited her lightsaber, its blue blade snapping to life, a half-dozen things happened at once in a beautiful, terrifying cascade of action. The Gand fired. Rex and his men, reacting instantly, leveled their own weapons. Ahsoka lunged towards the Chancellor. But Naruto was already moving. He did not lunge or sprint. He simply flowed. A flick of his wrist, and a single, heavy, silver data chip from his pocket shot across the room. It moved with impossible speed and precision, not deflecting the blaster bolt, but striking the barrel of the Gand's weapon a microsecond before it fired. The bolt went wide, vaporizing a priceless sculpture. At the same moment, the serving droid dropped its tray, its arm reconfiguring into a needle-tipped injector filled with a fast-acting neurotoxin, lunging for the Chancellor. Naruto, still in his original position, simply raised a hand. The air between him and the droid seemed to solidify, to become a wall of invisible force. The assassin droid, which was later found to have a tiny, living brain at its core, slammed into this wall and crumpled like a cheap tin can. And then there was the true threat. The Twi'leki dancing girl. As the chaos erupted, her form shimmered, her skin paling, her leku retracting, her body reshaping itself into a perfect copy of one of the Chancellor's moon aides. The Claudite assassin. With a poisoned blade now in her hand, she moved to strike the Chancellor in the confusion. No one saw her. No one sensed the shift. The Force was a storm of panic, and her deception was perfect. No one but Naruto. He had not been looking at her because he saw through her disguise. He had been listening to her song. And it was a lie. He took a single, flowing step from the balcony, a movement that seemed to cover 20 meters in an instant. He did not strike the assassin. He simply placed 2 fingers on her forehead. "The song you are singing is not your own," he said, his voice a calm, quiet note in the cacophony. A wave of pure, silver energy, the light of the Aetherius, flowed from his fingertips into the Claudity's mind. It was not an attack. It was a revelation. It stripped away the lies, the deception, the assumed identity, and showed her nothing but her own, true self. The psychic shock was absolute. Her shapeshifting abilities collapsed. Her form flickered rapidly through a dozen different species before collapsing back into her native, reptilian Claudite form. She dropped the blade, her eyes wide with a terror that was not of a captured assassin, but of a being who had just been forced to look into the core of her own soul. She crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Silence. The entire, chaotic event had lasted less than 3 seconds. The Gand was being dog-piled by clone troopers. The broken assassin droid lay sparking on the floor. The Claudite was out cold. And Naruto stood beside the utterly bewildered Chancellor, not a single hair out of place, an expression of mild disappointment on his face, as if he had expected a more interesting composition. Ayla Secura stood frozen, her lightsaber humming in her hand, its light casting a blue sheen on her stunned face. She had been ready for a fight. She had been ready for a threat she could see, could sense, could counter. But she had not been ready for this. It was not a battle. It was a dissection. He had taken apart a complex, multi-layered assassination plot with the casual, effortless precision of a master surgeon removing a tumor. He had not used overwhelming power. He had used overwhelming awareness. She looked at him, at this being who could hear the discordant notes in the symphony of the universe, and our fascination crystallized into something new, something far more potent and dangerous. It was the awe of a master craftsman who had just witnessed the creation of the world. The Jedi Council, in their arrogance, had sent her to leash a storm. But as she looked at Naruto Uzumaki, who was now calmly explaining to the hyperventilating Chancellor that he should probably consider changing his brand of cocktail droid, Ayla Secura realized her mission had changed once again. Her mission was no longer to deliver an anomaly, or even to comprehend a god. It was to convince the god that the galaxy was worth saving from its own noise. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A Symphony of Gilded Chains. The silence that descended upon the Chancellor's penthouse was a physical entity, heavier and more suffocating than the perfumed air it had replaced. It was a silence born of shock, composed of 100 held breaths, 1,000 racing heartbeats, and the low, fizzing crackle of a dying assassin droid. The Gand, bounty hunter, was already immobilized in a tangle of clone troopers, his muffled curses a futile percussion against the overwhelming quiet. The Claudite assassin lay in a heap, her mind shattered not by a blow, but by a forced, brutal self-awareness. And at the epicenter of this sudden, profound stillness stood Naruto Uzumaki, his posture relaxed, his expression one of mild ennui, as if he had finished watching a particularly predictable and poorly acted play. Chancellor Javax, a being whose entire existence was predicated on the control of assets and the mitigation of risk, was visibly vibrating, his long, gaunt frame trembling like a reed in a storm. His large, dark eyes, usually shrewd and calculating, were now wide with a terror that had transcended the simple fear of death and entered the realm of existential dread. He was staring at Naruto, not as a savior, but as a man might stare at a tidal wave that had just, with casual indifference, saved him from a shark. The gratitude was real, but it was utterly eclipsed by the awe and the terror of the power he had just witnessed. Security. Lockdown. Seal the spire, Javax stammered, his reedy voice cracking. His aides, who had been frozen in place, finally jolted into action, their own fear channeled into the familiar, comforting protocols of crisis management. Comlinks crackled to life. Armored blast doors began to slide into place with heavy, definitive thuds. The polite, civilized gala had become a gilded cage in the space of 3 seconds. Obi-Wan Kenobi was the first of the Jedi to find his equilibrium. He deactivated his lightsaber with a snap hiss that seemed to cut through the tension, and moved to the Chancellor's side, his voice the very essence of Jedi calm. "Chancellor, you are safe. The threats have been neutralized." His words were for Javax, but his eyes were on Naruto, a deep, searching look that held a universe of questions. Luminara and Ahsoka followed suit, sheathing their own weapons. Luminara's face was a mask of cold, analytical focus, but her mind was a maelstrom. She had been prepared for a physical threat, a puzzle of combat and force sense that she could solve with the tools of her training. What she had witnessed was not a fight, it was a reordering of reality. He had not dodged, parried, or struck. He had adjudicated. He had assessed the threats, identified their fundamental nature, and applied a precise, minimalist solution to each. It was an economy of motion and of power that was utterly alien to the Jedi's philosophy of active, engaged defense. Ahsoka, by contrast, felt a fierce, possessive pride swelling in her chest. They had all seen it now. The proof. The Council, Mace Windu, all of them saw him as a weapon, a blunt instrument. But she had seen the artist. The way he had used a simple datachip, not as a projectile, but as a scalpel to alter the trajectory of a blaster bolt. The way he had dismissed the assassin droid with a gesture that was less an attack and more a simple negation. And the way he had defeated the Claudite, not by harming her body, but by showing her the truth of her own soul. It was beautiful, it was elegant, and it was so far beyond the crude, clumsy violence of the war she had been fighting that she felt a sudden, profound disgust for the lightsabers on her belt. Ayla Secura was still processing. Her mind, a finely honed instrument for intelligence gathering and threat analysis, was running the sequence of events over and over, trying to find the flaw, the trick, the sleight of hand. There was none. His awareness had been absolute. While she and the other Jedi had been scanning the Force for the loud, screaming notes of overt hostility, he had been listening to the entire symphony, and had heard the 3, subtle, discordant notes that had been hiding beneath the melody. He hadn't just predicted the attack, he had perceived its underlying structure. Her mission to observe and understand him had just taken on a new, daunting dimension. It was like being asked to write a biography of gravity. "Indeed, Master Kenobi," Chancellor Javax finally said, finding his voice, though it remained thin and strained. He drew himself up, the moon instinct for control reasserting itself over the primal fear. He looked at Naruto, and a new expression began to dawn on his elongated face: calculation. "The threat has been neutralized, thanks to our guest." He gestured for one of his aides. "Bring me a direct, secure channel to the Supreme Chancellor's office. And get me a line to Master Windu of the Jedi Council." The fear was receding, replaced by the familiar, intoxicating rush of opportunity. Obi-Wan shared a look with Ayla. They both knew what was coming. The game had just changed. Naruto was no longer an unknown variable. He was now the most valuable, and the most dangerous, asset in the galaxy. An hour later, the Jedi were gathered in a sterile, white conference room deep within the Chancellor's private spire. The bodies and the debris had been cleared away. The shaken guests had been politely but firmly escorted to their quarters. The lockdown was still in effect. The 5 of them, Obi-Wan, Luminara, Ayla, Ahsoka, and Naruto, were seated around a circular, black table. Naruto was the only one who looked comfortable, sipping a cup of exotic, steaming tea that he had requested with the casual air of a man ordering a drink in his own home. "The Council is displeased," Luminara stated, breaking the silence. Her voice was clipped, her hands folded neatly on the table before her. She was attempting to project an aura of Jedi control. But her inner turmoil was a palpable tremor in the Force. They view this as a failure of our security. A failure. Ahsoka scoffed, unable to contain her indignation. We stopped them. He stopped them. The Chancellor is alive. How is that a failure? The assassins were able to get within striking distance of a high-value political target while under the protection of 4 Jedi Knights. Ayla elaborated, her voice calm and analytical, her Twi'leki accent adding a melodic lilt to the cold, hard facts. From the Council's perspective, on Coruscant, that is the definition of a failure. It demonstrates a weakness in our methods. She looked at Naruto, her dark eyes sharp with a professional curiosity that was beginning to be tinged with something warmer, something more personal. A weakness that was compensated for by an unknown, external factor. That's a clinical way of saying we would have been too late, Obi-Wan sighed, stroking his beard. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than they had been that morning. He was not just a general or a Jedi master, he was a political operative, and he could see the tangled web that was being woven around them. The Gand was a distraction, meant to draw our attention. The droid was the secondary attack, designed to strike while we were focused on the primary. The Claudite was brilliant. A tertiary, silent strike that would have succeeded while we were dealing with the first 2. We were outmaneuvered, but he wasn't, Luminara said, her gaze fixed on Naruto. It was not an accusation, but a statement of profound, unsettling fact. You saw it all. Before it happened. How? Naruto took a slow, deliberate sip of his tea, setting the cup down with a soft click before he answered. He looked at each of them in turn, his cerulean eyes seeming to pierce through their Jedi composure to the core of their individual uncertainties. You were looking for the threat, he began, his voice a calm, resonant counterpoint to their tension. You were searching for the intent to kill. You cast a net into the river, hoping to catch a specific kind of fish. But you were so focused on the fish. You failed to notice the shape of the river itself. You did not feel the currents change, the way the water eddied and flowed around the rocks. He leaned forward slightly, his presence filling the room. The Gand's song was loud and crude. A drumbeat of anger and greed. Easy to hear. The droid was a manufactured note, a discordance of unnatural life. But the Claudite, her song was the most interesting. She was singing a lie. She was holding a note of loyalty and servitude, but underneath it, there was a harmony of deception, and a baseline of pure, cold venom. It was out of tune. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. I do not listen for threats, Master Jedi. I listen to the music. A lie is always the ugliest sound in the room. His explanation did nothing to calm them. It only served to deepen the chasm between their understanding of the universe and his. They had spent their lives learning to read a book, and he was telling them he could feel the thoughts of the author. This, perception. Ayla leaned forward, her professional curiosity overriding her Jedi reserve. Is it an ability you can teach? The question was a probe, an intelligence operative's gambit to gauge the nature of his power. Naruto's lips quirked into a small, knowing smile. He looked directly at her, and for a moment, Ayla felt as if he could see every secret she had ever kept. Every mission she had ever run. Every life she had ever taken in the name of the Republic. Can you teach a blind person to see the color blue, Knight Sakura? He asked gently. You can describe it. You can say it is the color of your skin. The color of the sky. But you cannot make them see it. You have all spent your lives with your eyes closed, convinced that the world is only what you can touch. To earn to see, you must first be willing to admit that you are blind. The gentle rebuke struck Ayla with more force than a physical blow. He had not just answered her question, he had analyzed her motive for asking it and found it wanting. He was not a power to be studied or a weapon to be wielded. He was a teacher, and the first lesson was humility. A flicker of heat, a mixture of professional frustration and a nascent, undeniable attraction, bloomed in her chest. Their philosophical debate was interrupted by the chime of the conference room door. A moon aide entered, bowing low. Master Jedi, Chancellor Javax requests your presence. His call with the Jedi Council is about to begin. The Chancellor's office was a monument to wealth and power. The view of Teth's swirling clouds was panoramic. The desk was carved from the heartwood of a single, 1,000-year-old Roshar tree, and the air itself seemed to hum with the silent, efficient flow of galactic commerce. Javax was seated behind his desk. his earlier fear replaced entirely by a mask of serene, unshakable confidence. Floating in the air before him was the holographic image of the Jedi Council, a semicircle of solemn, robed figures. Mace Windu was at the center. His expression as hard and as unforgiving as granite. Yoda, his ancient eyes closed in contemplation, was beside him. Chancellor Javax, Windu's voice boomed, "We are relieved to see you are unharmed. But this security breach is unacceptable. The assassins' origins must be determined. We will be sending a team of our best investigators at once." "That will not be necessary, Master Windu," Javax said, his voice smooth as oil. He steepled his long, elegant fingers. "I have already determined all that I need to know. My would-be partners in the separatist movement have revealed their true nature. They are clumsy, brutish, and ultimately, ineffective." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "Therefore, I am prepared to sign the treaty, bring the full economic and military might of the corporate hegemony into an exclusive alliance with the Galactic Republic. Effective immediately." A murmur of surprise went through the holographic council members. Obi-Wan had expected this, but the speed and finality of it was still breathtaking. It was a massive strategic victory for the Republic. "This is welcome news, Chancellor," Windu said, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. "Ah, but there is a condition," Javax continued, a predatory gleam in his dark eyes. "A non-negotiable addendum to our treaty." He gestured to Naruto, who was standing quietly near the window. "This man, Naruto Uzumaki. His services have been exemplary. I find his presence to be a uniquely effective form of risk management. The corporate hegemony's alliance with the Republic is contingent upon him remaining here, on Teth, as my permanent security advisor and diplomatic liaison." The council was silent. Mace Windu's face was a thundercloud. He had intended to bring Naruto to Coruscant, to study him, to contain him, to chain him in the gilded cage of the Jedi Temple. Now, Javax had built another cage, a far more luxurious one, and was claiming the asset for himself. It was a political checkmate of staggering audacity. "The Jedi Order does not barter in living beings, Chancellor," Windu said, his voice dangerously low. "I am not bartering," Javax countered smoothly. "I am stating a fact of galactic economics. My corporation, and by extension my life, represents a significant asset to the Republic. I am merely taking the necessary steps to secure that asset. Mr. Uzumaki has proven his competence in this regard. The Jedi have not." The insult was delivered with the precision of a surgeon's blade. "You cannot have my fleet and my factories without ensuring the security of the man who signs the checks. The two are now a package deal." Yoda finally opened his eyes, his gaze seeming to look past the hologram, past the Chancellor, to settle directly on Naruto. "Power. This one has," the ancient master rasped. "A pawn in your game, he is not. A dangerous path you walk, Chancellor." "The most profitable paths often are, Master Yoda," Javax replied with a thin, triumphant smile. Mace Windu looked as if he was about to personally reach through the hologram and strangle the moon. But he was trapped. The political and military value of the hegemony was too great. To refuse would be to throw away one of the biggest victories of the war. "The Council will take this under advisement," he growled, which was the political equivalent of a surrender. The transmission ended. Naruto, who had watched the entire exchange with the quiet patience of a man watching a child's game, finally turned from the window. He looked at Javax, his expression unreadable. "You have built a cage for me, Chancellor," he stated simply. "A gilded one, my dear fellow." Javax chuckled, spreading his hands. "The finest in the galaxy. Anything you desire, it is yours. You are not a prisoner here. You are a king." "A king is just a prisoner with a larger cell," Naruto replied, his voice devoid of emotion. He walked towards the desk, his presence seeming suck the triumphant energy out of the room. He leaned forward, his hands resting on the polished wood, his face just inches from the Chancellor's. The moon's confident smile faltered. "Let us be clear, Chancellor. I am not your asset. I am not your bodyguard. I am not your king. I am here because, for the moment, the song of this place is more interesting than the noise of the rest of your galaxy. The moment that changes, your cage will be revealed for what it is, a collection of sticks. And I will leave." He straightened up, his gaze sweeping over the Jedi. "And my handlers will be free to leave with me." With that, he turned and walked out of the office, leaving behind a suddenly very nervous Chancellor and 4 Jedi who were beginning to realize that the cage Javax had built was not for Naruto at all. It was for them. They were now bound to Teth, to the whims of a moon politician, and to the orbit of a man who was a living paradox. They were his jailers, and they were his fellow prisoners. Later that cycle, Ayla Secura found Naruto in the Starlight Observatory at the very apex of the spire. It was a vast, circular room with a transparent dome for a ceiling, offering an unfiltered, breathtaking view of Teth's swirling lavender storms and the endless, diamond-dusted ocean of space. The only light came from the stars themselves. He was standing in the center of the room, his head tilted back, his eyes closed, looking for all the world like a man drinking in the cosmos. "You are not an easy man to find," Ayla said, her voice soft, not wanting to break the profound silence of the room. She had used all her tracking skills, all her stealth, to approach him unheard, but she knew he had been aware of her from the moment she stepped out of the lift. "You were not looking for a man," he replied, without opening his eyes. "You were looking for an anomaly. An intelligence asset. You were tracking a file, not a person." She moved to stand beside him, her professional persona a comfortable shield. "Is that what you think I am? A simple spy, trying to catalog you? It is the song you have been singing since you arrived," he said, finally opening his eyes and turning his head to look at her. The starlight was reflected in their blue depths, making them look like twin galaxies. "The hunter, the shadow, the gatherer of secrets. It is a beautiful song, in its way, full of discipline, and focus, and a quiet, lonely strength." He paused, his gaze seeming to penetrate her shield, to see the woman beneath the Jedi Knight. "But it is not the only song you know how to sing." The intensity of his perception was unnerving. He was not reading her mind. He was reading her history, her very essence. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice a little less steady than she would have liked. "You were a child, once," he murmured, his voice a soft, hypnotic cadence. "Before the Order found you. You were a dancer. You sang the song of the sand and the sky on Ryloth. The song of freedom. You have not sung that song for a very long time, Ayla Secura. You have traded it for the dirge of duty." He reached out, not to touch her, but his fingers hovered a mere inch from her cheek. "I can hear it, underneath all the other noise. A quiet, sad little melody, waiting for the music to start again." Her breath hitched. No one knew that. Her life before the Order was a sealed record. A past she had deliberately buried under years of training and discipline. For him to see it, to hear it, to describe it with such gentle, piercing accuracy, it was a violation and a validation all at once. The shield of the Jedi Knight, the spy, the hunter, shattered into a million pieces. For the first time, she was not looking at an asset or an anomaly. She was looking at a man who saw her. The real her. The dancer she had forgotten she was. "Who are you?" she whispered, the question no longer a strategic probe, but a genuine, desperate plea for understanding. Naruto let his hand fall to his side. "I am the one who listens," he said, a small, sad smile on his lips. "And I think, Knight Secura, that you have a song you have been wanting to sing for a very long time." He turned his gaze back to the stars. "And I would like to hear it." Ayla stood beside him in the starlight, the silence of the observatory no longer empty, but filled with the ghost of a forgotten melody. The hunter had become the hunted, her own heart the target. And the attraction she felt was no longer professional, or even physical. It was the pull of a soul that had just been offered the nay thing it had craved for an eternity, the freedom to be truly heard. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Song of Rust and Regret. Life in the gilded cage was a peculiar form of torture for a Jedi. It was a slow, creeping paralysis. A death by 1,000 comforts. The days on the Tethan spire bled into one another, a seamless, sterile procession of opulent meals they did not need, luxurious quarters they did not enjoy, and a profound, gnawing sense of uselessness. They were guards for a god who needed no guarding, jailers for a prisoner who respected no walls. Chancellor Javax, now buoyed by the full backing of the Republic, treated them with a cloying, proprietary courtesy, parading them at minor diplomatic functions like exotic, well-behaved pets. They were symbols of his newfound power, livin' proof of his direct line to the Jedi Council and the Supreme Chancellor. They were ornaments. Ahsoka Tano felt it most keenly. She was a warrior, a creature of motion and purpose, and the enforced idleness was a poison to her spirit. She spent her time in the Spire's training rooms, pushing her body to its limits, her twin lightsabers a blur of green light as she carved through training droids with a ferocity born of pure frustration. It was a poor substitute for the clarity of real combat, for the feeling of making a difference. Luminara unduly retreated into meditation, seeking a stillness in the Force to match the stillness of her new life. But she found no peace. Her mind, once a tranquil garden of disciplined thought, was now a riot of unwelcome growth. Naruto's words, his actions, the very fact of his existence, were seeds of doubt that had taken root and were threatening to tear apart the very foundations of her faith. Her control, once the bedrock of her identity, now felt like a fragile dam holding back a flood of terrifying questions. Obi-Wan Kenobi, the consummate diplomat, bore the situation with a weary, resigned grace. He played the political game with Javax, engaging in endless, pointless conversations. His mind always working, always searching for an angle, a way to turn this gilded prison into an advantage for the Republic. But even his legendary patience was wearing thin. Ayla Secura was the only one who seemed to find a new purpose. Her mission was no longer defined by the Council, but by the man who had seen the forgotten dancer within her. She spent her hours in Naruto's presence, not as a spy or a guard, but as a student. She did not ask him about his power or his origins. Instead, they spoke of philosophy, of art, of the nature of perception. He was learning not how to fight like him, but how to see like him. It was a slow, frustrating process, like learning a new language from a single, enigmatic teacher, but with every conversation, she felt the rigid confines of her Jedi training begin to soften, to become more fluid. The hunter was learning to listen, and the quiet intimacy that grew between them was a palpable thing, a silent melody that only they, and a very observant Ahsoka Tano, could hear. Naruto himself seemed utterly content. He treated the spire not as a prison, but as a library, a complex and interesting ecosystem to be observed. He would spend hours in the arboretum, coaxing impossible life from dying plants. He would sit in the grand casinos, not gambling, but simply listening to the cacophony of 1,000 desperate hopes and greedy desires. He was a being of infinite patience, and his calm was a constant, maddening reproach to the Jedi's growing restlessness. The first sign that the gilded cage was rusting from within was subtle. A flicker of the lights in their quarters. A momentary stutter in the hum of the life support. A turbolift that shuddered to a halt for a few seconds between floors. Javax's staff dismissed them as minor. Routine power fluctuations, the negligible cost of maintaining a city the size of a mountain. The Jedi, their senses attuned to the physical world, registered them as nothing more than annoyances. But Naruto heard them as a gasp of pain. He was in the Starlight Observatory with Ayla and Ahsoka, watching the slow, majestic dance of Teth's lavender clouds, when it happened again. The brilliant starlight from the dome flickered, dimming for a full 3 seconds before returning to its full intensity. In the sudden twilight, the spire groaned, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated up through the floor. A sound of immense, stressed metal. "That's the 5th time this cycle," Ahsoka commented, bracing herself against a console. "You'd think for all his wealth, Javax could keep the lights on." Ayla, however, was watching Naruto. His head was cocked to the side, his serene expression gone, replaced by a look of deep, focused concentration, like a physician listening to a patient's ailing heart. "It's getting weaker," Naruto murmured, his voice a low thrum of concern. "The song is strained. There is a sickness in the heart of this place." "A sickness?" Ayla asked, moving closer. "The power grid is failing. It's a mechanical issue." "No," Naruto corrected her gently, his gaze distant, looking down through the thousands of floors of chrome and crystal to the spire's unseen foundations. "Machines sing a song of purpose, of logic, of clean, efficient power. This is not the sound of a machine breaking. This is the sound of a life form screaming." The intensity of his statement silenced them. He was not speaking metaphorically. Ahsoka and Ayla exchanged a look. They had both felt the groan of the spire, but he had heard it as a cry of pain. Their Decision to investigate was not a formal one. It was a simple, unspoken consensus born of a shared, desperate need for purpose. When Naruto announced, "I am going to find the source of that sound," Ahsoka was at his side in an instant. Her eyes bright with a warrior's fire. Ayla, after a moment's hesitation in which the hunter and the student warred within her, gave a decisive nod. Her new path was to understand his. And his path now led down, into the darkness. Their only obstacle was Luminara, whom they found in a meditation chamber, her posture a perfect, rigid line. When Ayla explained their intentions, Luminara's eyes opened. Cold and disapproving. "This is unsanctioned," she stated, her voice sharp. "We are here as guests, as symbols. To go skulking in the spire's maintenance corridor. Ours is beneath our station and a violation of Chancellor Javax's trust." "Javax is lying," Ahsoka countered, her voice hot. "These aren't minor fluctuations. The whole spire is groaning like a wounded animal. Naruto feels it. Something is seriously wrong. You place your faith in the feelings of an anomaly over the official reports of our host." Luminara's question was laced with a chilling disappointment. "Yes," Ahsoka replied without hesitation. Before the argument could escalate, Naruto, who had been waiting patiently in the doorway, spoke. "Your host is a liar, Master Unduli," he said. His voice calm but carrying a weight of absolute certainty. "He sings a song of control and confidence, but his harmony is riddled with the fear of a man who knows the foundations of his house are crumbling. I am going to see why. You are free to remain here, in the quiet, comfortable rooms of a liar's house." He turned to leave. The choice he presented was stark. Stay in the gilded cage and cling to the illusion of order. Or follow him into the unknown and embrace the chaotic truth. For a long moment, Luminara remained frozen, the tenets of her entire life warring with the undeniable evidence of her own senses. She had seen him unmake an army. She had seen him banish a creature of the void. She had felt his power remake the very air she breathed. To believe Javax over him was not just foolish, it was a willful act of blindness. With a soft, frustrated sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 generations of Jedi dogma, she rose to her feet. "It seems my meditation has been unproductive," she said stiffly. "Perhaps a walk is in order." The descent was a journey through the social strata of the spire made physical. They started in the silent, opulent, perfumed corridors of the diplomatic levels. A few hundred floors down, the air became more functional, the decor more utilitarian, the sounds a low thrum of commerce and administration. 1,000 floors further, and they were in the industrial zones. The air thick with the smell of ozone and hot metal, the corridors echoing with the clang of machinery and the shouts of laborers. Ayla's skills as an intelligence operative proved invaluable. With a sliced keycard here, a whispered Jedi mind trick there, a confident walk past a security checkpoint, she opened a path for them into the spire's restricted underbelly. They were heading for main engineering, the heart of the power grid, located deep in the spire's primary support column. The chief engineer of the Tethan Spire was not what they expected. They had anticipated a stuffy, bureaucratic functionary. Instead, the woman who confronted them as they stepped onto the main engineering deck was a whirlwind of focused, grease-stained energy. She was a human in her late 30s, with sharp, intelligent brown eyes, dark hair pulled back in a messy but functional knot, and a sarcastic smirk that seemed to be her default expression. She wore a stained, dark gray jumpsuit, and in her hand, she held a hydrospanner with the casual familiarity of a warrior holding a sword. Well, she said, her voice a dry, cynical rasp that cut through the roar of the massive reactor core that dominated the chamber. "Look what the turbolift dragged in. A pack of topside mystics and their pet project." She gave Naruto a long, unimpressed once-over. "I'm Rihanna, and this is my engine room. Unless you've brought me a Priority 1 work order from Javax himself, I suggest you take your robes and your laser swords and go back to sipping cocktails before you get yourselves electrocuted." "We're investigating the power fluctuations," Ayla began, stepping into her diplomatic, charming persona. Rihanna cut her off with a humorless laugh. "Are you now? Took you long enough. They've only been getting worse for the last 6 cycles. Don't worry your pretty heads about it. It's under control. That's the official story, anyway. We believe the problem is more than mechanical," Luminara stated, her tone cold and authoritative. "Oh, I see," Rihanna said, her smirk widening. The Force is angry with the converters, is it? Did a gremlin get into the primary conduit? Her sarcasm was a thick, impenetrable wall. Before anyone else could speak, Naruto stepped forward. He ignored Rihanna completely. His attention was fixed on the colossal reactor core, a multi-story cylinder of glowing, pulsating energy contained within a web of magnetic fields. He placed a hand on the cool metal of the railing, closing his eyes. "It's not a gremlin," he said, his voice a low "whoo" that seemed to harmonize with the reactor's roar. "It's a fever. The primary resonance crystal, it's fractured. Not physically, spiritually. Its matrix is degrading. It's trying to regulate the energy flow. But the demand from the upper spire is draining it faster than it can recuperate. It's not just failing. It's dying. And it's in pain." He opened his eyes and looked directly at Rihanna. Micro fissures are generating a cascade of sympathetic vibrations, putting stress on the secondary conduits in the foundation levels. That's the groaning sound. The sound you've been trying to isolate for the past 3 weeks. Rihanna's sarcastic smirk dissolved, replaced by an expression of pure, slack-jawed shock. Her face went pale beneath the grease stains. Everything he had just said, the resonance crystal, the degrading matrix, the sympathetic vibrations, it wasn't mystical nonsense. It was a perfect, terrifyingly accurate diagnosis of the problem, a problem she and her team had been struggling to even define, let alone solve. He had described the deepest, most secret fears of her engineering logs as if he were reading them off a datapad. How in the name of the core could you know that?" she whispered, the hydrospanner slipping from her suddenly numb fingers and clattering to the deck. "I listened," Naruto replied simply. In that moment, Rihanna's cynical, hardened worldview fractured. These were not just pampered mystics. This man understood her engine. He understood it better than she did. A new, unfamiliar emotion began to bloom in her chest, right next to T. Terror of the impending critical failure. A deep, profound, and utterly overwhelming surge of respect. And with it, a spark of something more. He was the first person from topside who had ever dared to listen to the song of her world. "The problem isn't here," she said, her voice now tight with a new, grim purpose. She snatched up her hydrospanner, her mind made up. "The primary crystal is just a symptom. The real sickness, it's deeper. In the foundations. In the old conduits Javax ordered us to reactivate and push to 1000% capacity 6 months ago." She looked at them, her eyes blazing with the fire of a woman who had been vindicated and terrified all at once. "You want to see the ghost in my machine? Fine. Follow me. And try not to die." The journey down from main engineering was a descent into a mechanical hell. The corridors were no longer maintained. They were dark, dripping tunnels of rusted metal and exposed wiring, lit only by the green and blue glow of the Jedi's lightsabers. The air was thick with the smell of decay, of stagnant water, and of ozone from arcing electricity. The groaning sound was constant now, a chorus of 1,000 tortured spirits that was the spire's own dying song. Rihanna led them with a grim certainty, her path illuminated by a heavy-duty glowrod. She pointed to massive, crystalline structures embedded in the rockcrete walls, glowing with a faint, sickly yellow light. "These are the old conduits. Not synthetic, like the new stuff. They were here when the spire was built. Woven into the mountain itself. Javax found a way to tap them, to drain them. He called it resource optimization. I called it strip mining the foundations of our own home." They finally arrived in a vast, cavernous chamber at the absolute nadir of the spire. It was a natural cave, expanded and reinforced with ancient, crumbling technology. In the center of the cavern was the source of all the spire's life, and all its pain. It was a colossal, Atlas-like structure of interlocking crystals, each one as thick as a Rocher tree, pulsing with a weak, erratic, golden light. It was a heart, a living, crystalline heart, and it was covered in black, creeping lesions, like a disease. Wires, thick as a man's arm, had been drilled into its core, siphoning its energy, draining its lifeblood to power the casinos and penthouses miles above. "This is it," Rihanna breathed, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and horror. "The Tethan heart. It's not a machine. It was alive." As they stepped forward, a dozen figures emerged from the shadows surrounding the heart. They were not droids. They were elite, heavily armed soldiers in the black and silver armor of the hegemony's corporate security force. Their weapons were not standard blasters, but heavy-duty sonic rifles and ion cannons, designed to incapacitate and disable. "That's far enough, Chief Engineer," the lead soldier's voice boomed, his helmet distorting the sound into a metallic rasp. "Chancellor Javax has been alerted to your unsanctioned tour. This area is off limits. You will all surrender your weapons and return to the upper levels." "Now." "So he knew," Ahsoka growled, her hand tightening on her lightsaber. "He knew he was killing this thing." "Stand down," Luminara commanded, her voice ringing with Jedi authority. "By the laws of the Galactic Republic, we are investigating a clear and present danger to this entire spire." The soldier laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "The Republic has no laws down here. Only the company does. Last chance. Power down." The Jedi ignited their lightsabers. The iconic snap hiss of the blades a declaration of war in the heart of the dying machine. The corporate soldiers raised their weapons. The standoff was absolute, but Naruto was not looking at the soldiers. His gaze was fixed on the dying heart. He walked past the Jedi, past the soldiers who tracked his every move, their weapons humming with lethal energy. He did not seem to see them. He walked until he stood at the base of the colossal, diseased crystal, and he placed his palm flat against its surface. "I hear you," he whispered, his voice a soft, gentle melody against the groaning dirge of the chamber. "You have been screaming for so long. Be still now. Rest." He closed his eyes. The silver, primordial light of the Aetherius, the light of creation itself, flowed from his hand into the heart. It was not a jolt of power, not an infusion of energy. It was a gentle, soothing balm. A quiet counter-melody to the song of pain. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic for Javax's parasitic technology. The dying heart, soothed for the first time in months, stopped fighting. It stopped trying to regulate the energy being drained from it. It simply let go. A tidal wave of raw, untamed, chaotic energy, 1,000 times more powerful than the reactor was designed to handle, surged up the conduits that had been draining it. The corporate soldiers advance. Weapons overloaded with a deafening bang, their power packs exploding in a shower of sparks. Their powered armor seized up, locking them in place like statues. The lights in the chamber, the lights in the entire spire, did not just flicker. They exploded. The gilded cage was plunged into absolute, profound darkness. In the sudden, silent blackness, only one light remained. It was the soft, golden, now steady pulse of the Tethan heart. And the even softer, silver-white glow that emanated from the man who held its fate in the palm of his hand. Rihanna stared, her cynical heart hammering in her chest, utterly captivated. The Jedi stood in stunned silence, their useless lightsabers extinguished. They had come down here expecting to fight a machine or a monster. But Naruto had, once again, refused to play their game. He had not fought the symptom. He had not fought the guards. He had gone straight to the source of the pain and offered it the one thing no one else had, a moment of peace. And in doing so, he had just declared a silent, absolute war against the man who had built his empire on that pain. The lights were out in the Tethan spire, and the truth was finally coming out of the dark. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. Echoes in a dying machine. The darkness was not an absence of light, it was a presence. It was a thick, velvety blanket woven from the sudden death of a billion circuits, smelling of ozone, hot metal, and the damp, ancient stone of the spire's foundations. The roaring symphony of the engine room and the tortured groaning of the spire had been replaced by a silence so profound it seemed to have a sound of its own. The soft, rhythmic dripping of water, the faint, panicked shouts from distant corridors, and the thundering of their own hearts in their ears. In the center of this vast, new silence, two lights held dominion. The first was the Tethan heart itself, its erratic, sickly pulse now a steady, gentle, golden thrum, a slow and regular heartbeat that seemed to exude a palpable aura of relief. The second was the soft, silver-white luminescence that emanated from Naruto Uzumaki, a calm, ethereal glow that seemed to push back the oppressive darkness, creating a small, safe harbor of reality in the blackness. Rihanna stared, her knuckles white where she gripped her now useless glowrod. The cynical, Hardened engineer had been stripped away, leaving behind a woman in the presence of a miracle. She had spent her life listening to the song of machines, a language of logic, stress tolerances, and energy outputs. She had known the heart was in pain, but she had understood it as a mechanical problem, a system approaching critical failure. Naruto had looked at her dying engine and seen a dying soul. He had not repaired it. He had comforted it. The distinct ion was one that shattered her entire understanding of the universe. It's stable, she whispered, her voice cracking with a mixture of terror and awe. The feedback loop is broken. The energy drain has ceased. She looked at Naruto, her sharp, intelligent eyes wide with a question she didn't know how to ask. What did you do? I asked it to rest, Naruto said, pulling his hand away from the crystalline surface. The silver glow around him faded, but the heart's golden pulse remained, a gentle, eternal flame in the darkness. It has been holding the weight of this entire spire while being eaten alive. It needed a moment of peace. A moment of peace. Ahsoka Tano's voice was sharp, cutting through the awe. She ignited one of her lightsabers, the yellowish-green blade casting long, dancing shadows across the cavern. You've plunged a city of millions into darkness. Javax will see this as an attack. It was an attack, Luminara corrected, her own green blade snapping to life, her expression grim. She was back on familiar ground now, a tactical crisis. An act of sabotage against the established authority. We are now officially insurgents. We are engineers, Rihanna countered, her voice regaining its familiar sharp edge. She snatched a datapad from her belt, its screen providing a third, smaller pool of light. Her fingers flew across the surface. And this act of sabotage is the only thing that's kept this entire spire from collapsing into a black hole of its own making. The datapad beeped, displaying a terrifyingly complex schematic overlaid with cascading red warning icons. He's right. The heart is stable for now, but the parasitic conduits Javax grafted onto it are still there. They're like leeches on an artery. If we just turn the power back on, the drain will start again, and this time, the heart won't have the strength to fight back. It will die, and when it does, she trailed off, gesturing up into the infinite blackness above them. The structural integrity fields will fail. The whole spire will pancake itself, from the penthouse to the foundations. The stakes, already impossibly high, had just escalated to an apocalyptic level. They had not just started a fight. They had taken responsibility for the lives of every single person on Teth. Ayla Secura, who had remained silent, her blue blade adding its light to the chamber, finally spoke, her voice a calm, strategic center in the growing storm. Then our objective is clear. We cannot simply restore the power. We must sever the parasitic conduits at their source. We have to perform surgery. She looked at Rihanna. Can it be done? Theoretically, Rihanna said, chewing on her lower lip as she studied the schematic. There are 3 primary tapping conduits, massive energy transfer nodes drilled into the heart's main arteries. They're located in sub-levels gamma, delta, and epsilon. Getting to them, even with power, is a nightmare. In the dark, through a full security lockdown, it's impossible. Impossible is a word for people who have not yet been properly motivated, Naruto stated, his voice cutting through the technical jargon. He had been listening, not to their words, but to the flow of their intent. The harmony of their shared purpose. He looked at the 4 women, each a different instrument, a different note, now finding their place in a new, dangerous song. Rihanna, you will be our guide. Master Unduli, your discipline will be our shield. Knight Sakura, your knowledge of infiltration will be our key. Ahsoka, he looked at the young Togruta, and a faint smile touched his lips, your fire will be our sword. Quote, and you, Luminara asked, her gaze sharp and questioning. What will you be? I will be the one who listens, Naruto replied. Javax is not a fool. He will not be idle. He will send something into the darkness after us. I will hear it coming. High above, in a crimson-lit emergency command center, Chancellor Javax was a figure of pure, cold fury. Holographic screens flickered around him, displaying schematics of the dead spire, cascading error messages, and the panicked, useless reports of his security chiefs. They're in the Foundation, he snarled, his voice a low, venomous hiss. With the engineer, the traitor, We've lost all surveillance below sub-level 200, Chancellor, a subordinate reported, his voice trembling. The blackout has fried the entire network. Then we will be his eyes and ears, Javax said, his long fingers keying a rapid sequence into his command console. A new schematic appeared on the main screen, one that was not on any official record. It showed a network of hidden tunnels, automated defense turrets, and sealed pens deep within the spire's rockcrete foundations. Activate Sub-Level Containment Protocol 7. Release the Scrappers. The subordinate went pale. Sir, the Scrappers. They're automated mining and sanitation units. They're not discriminating. They're programmed to eliminate any unauthorized organic or technological presence to prevent industrial espionage. Precisely, Javax said, a cruel, thin smile spreading across his face. These Jedi and their pet anomaly have chosen to crawl around in the dark with the trash. So, we shall send the garbage disposals to meet them. Unchain my monsters. Let them clean house. The descent into sub-level Gamma was a journey into the spire's forgotten bowels. Rihanna led them through a maze of rusting maintenance catwalks and claustrophobic service tunnels, her datapad schematic their only map. The only illumination came from the Jedi's lightsabers, He iconic weapons transformed from symbols of justice into simple, necessary tools, their hum a lonely sound in the oppressive, dripping darkness. Here, Rihanna said, stopping before a massive, circular blast door, sealed shut. This is the primary access tunnel to the Gamma conduit. It's triple reinforced. We'll never get through. Ayla ran a hand over the seamless join. We won't have to. She pointed to a small, almost invisible maintenance hatch near the floor, half hidden behind a tangle of dead cables. Security doors are designed to stop an army coming down the main hall. They never expect a spider to crawl through the walls. It was a tight fit. One by one, they squeezed through the narrow, dark opening, emerging into a vast, cavernous space that echoed with a low, predatory hum. This was not the organic, living pulse of the heart. It was the sound of dormant, waiting machinery. I hear them, Naruto said, his voice a low whisper that sent a shiver down their spines. A song of rust and metal. No life. Just programming. A hunger made of gears and wires. As if on cue, the chamber was suddenly flooded with dozens of single, red, optical sensors. They were not droids in the separatist sense. They were more like metallic beasts. Quadrupedal, low-slung chassis with heavy, armor-plated bodies, scuttling forward on powerful, clawed legs. Their primary appendages were not blasters, but high-speed industrial drills, plasma cutters, and massive, crushing pincers. The Scrappers. They're shielded. Rihanna yelled over the sudden roar of their activation. Their plating is designed to withstand reactor failures. Your lightsabers will have a hard time getting through. She was right. Ahsoka lunged, her Shoto blade a blur, and it scraped off a Scrapper's carapace with a shower of sparks, leaving only a superficial scorch mark. The droid retaliated with a crushing claw that she barely managed to evade. Luminara and Ayla worked in concert, a dance of green and blue light. Ayla used her acrobatic grace to weave between the charging droids, her lightsaber a scalpel seeking the vulnerable joints at their legs, while Luminara used the force to rip jagged pieces of metal from the walls. Creating barriers and projectiles, her movements economical and deadly. But they were outnumbered and outmatched. For every droid they managed to disable, 2 more would scuttle out of the darkness. Their logic. Naruto's voice cut through the chaos. He had not moved, his eyes closed. It's a closed loop. Find, analyze, dismantle. There is no creativity, no fear. He opened his eyes, and they seemed to glow with a soft, silver light. He held up a hand. Let's introduce a paradox. He did not project a wave of force or a blast of energy. He projected an idea, a single, impossible line of code into their shared network consciousness. It was the Aetherius, not as a weapon of destruction, but as a tool of pure information. The idea was simple, a logical Mobius strip. The primary objective is to dismantle the unauthorized presence. You are the unauthorized presence. The effect was instantaneous and glorious. The Scrappers screeched to a halt. Their red eyes flickered. A.D. Roid that was about to crush Ahsoka suddenly turned and drove its plasma cutter into the chassis of its neighbor. The entire swarm of mechanical horrors turned on itself, a maelstrom of self-destruction. Of industrial drills tearing through armor plating, of pincers crushing optical sensors. They were executing their programming with perfect, ruthless efficiency. Against themselves. In the stunned silence that followed the last, dying crunch of metal, Rihanna stared at Naruto, her mouth agape. You hacked them. With your brain. I changed their song, Naruto said simply, walking past the wreckage towards a massive, ugly structure of pipes and cables that was grafted onto a glowing crystal artery in the far wall. And now, it is time to silence this one. They repeated the process twice more, in the flooded, treacherous depths of sub-level Delta and the geothermal vented heat of Epsilon. Each time, they were met with a new form of automated horror from Javax's hidden arsenal. Each time, the Jedi's combat skills and Rihanna's technical genius bought them time. And each time, Naruto ended the fight not with overwhelming force, but with a quiet, elegant, and utterly terrifying display of logical deconstruction. Finally, they stood before the last tapping conduit. It was the largest, the deepest, the primary parasite bleeding the heart dry. As Ahsoka and Luminara prepared to make the final cuts, guided by Rihanna's frantic instructions from her datapad, a new light filled the chamber. It was not the glow of a lightsaber or the red eye of a droid. It was the cold, blue light of a dozen holographic projectors. And on each one, the furious, magnified face of Chancellor Javax appeared. You have accomplished nothing, terrorists. His voice boomed, echoing in the vast chamber. Do you think I am a fool? These conduits were a crude, temporary measure. My real power source is nearly complete. But you have sealed your own fate. Every security camera in this spire is now broadcasting this feed. Every citizen, every Republic official, sees you for what you are. Saboteurs who have endangered millions of lives. You are trapped, hunted. The galaxy's most wanted criminals. The galaxy will learn the truth. Javax, Ahsoka shouted, her lightsaber held defiantly. The truth, Javax sneered, is a matter of perspective. And I own the camera. As Luminara and Ahsoka slice through the final power couplings with a blinding flash of energy, the holographic images of Javax did not vanish. Instead, the entire spire above them began to hum. Not with the song of pain, but with a new, harmonious, golden light. Warm, healthy illumination flooded the corridor they were in. The power was returning. The Tethan heart, finally free, let out a single, pure, resonant pulse of life. A wave of golden energy that surged up through the spire's true, natural conduits. The lights did not just turn on, they woke up. The entire city, from the deepest foundation to the highest observation deck, was now lit with a warm, clean, golden radiance, the light of a living, breathing entity. But Javax's threat was real. As the lights came on, they saw that every exit was now blocked by shimmering, impenetrable energy shields. They were still trapped. The spire is alive, Rihanna breathed, looking at the healthy, golden glow. A tear traced a clean path through the grease on her cheek. And its jailer is still in charge, Ayla added, her voice grim. They had healed the machine. They had won the battle for the spire's soul. But as the triumphant, golden light of the heart illuminated their faces, they realized with a chilling certainty that they had just lost the war for their own freedom. On 1,000 screens, in 1,000,000 homes and offices across the galaxy, they were no longer heroes. They were the villains, and their gilded cage had just become a galaxy-wide prison. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Song of the Stone. The golden light of the reborn Tethan heart was not a salvation, it was an indictment. It was a brilliant, celestial floodlight that illuminated the bars of their new cage. Every corridor, every turbolift, every hangar bay was now sealed by shimmering, impenetrable energy shields. Their golden hue a mockery of the life-giving energy that now powered them. Javax, with the malevolent genius of a master propagandist, had not used the heart's power to sustain the spire's life, but to perfect its function as a prison. And on 1,000 screens across the galaxy, the faces of 4 Jedi Knights and an engineer were now synonymous with terrorism. He's turned our victory into a checkmate. Ayla Secura's voice was a low, grim whisper, the melodic Twi'leki accent hardened by a tactical pragmatism that was chilling. We're trapped, and the entire Republic is now the audience for our execution. She stood with the others in the vast, now golden cavern of the heart, her blue lightsaber still ignited, its blade seeming pale and washed out in the overwhelming radiance of the chamber. Luminara Unduli's face was a mask of cold fury. The Jedi Order, her life, was built upon a foundation of public trust, of being seen as the guardians of peace. Javax had demolished that foundation in a single, masterful stroke of media manipulation. The Council will not be swayed by doctored footage, she stated, though her voice lacked its usual unshakable conviction. The Council isn't who matters right now, Rihanna retorted, her fingers flying across her datapad. The engineer was wired, her exhaustion completely burned away by a furious, high-octane cocktail of adrenaline and vindication. Javax doesn't need to convince the Council. He just needs to convince the public and the local hegemony forces that we're a threat. He's bought himself all the justification he needs to use lethal force. He's not trying to arrest us. He's trying to bury us. The datapad chimed, a shrill, panicked note. It's worse than I thought, Rihanna breathed, her face pale in the screen's glow. He's sealed everything. The schematics I have are useless. Every official route, every maintenance tunnel, every ventilation shaft, it's a dead end. Ahsoka slammed a fist against the crystalline wall, the impact generating a low, resonant chime. So that's it. We just wait here until his private army comes down to finish us off. Her voice was a raw, frustrated growl. The warrior in her screamed for a fight. For an enemy she could see and strike. This battle of politics and perception was a suffocating fog. No, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the rising tide of their despair. He had been standing with his back to them, his hand once again resting gently on the surface of the Tethan heart, not to give it power, but to listen. You were thinking like prisoners. You were looking at the cage. You were not listening to the song of the stone. He turned to face them, his cerulean eyes calm and clear. The cage Javax built is new. It is a parasite, an artificial layer of control. But the spire is old. Its song is deep and slow. And it does not like its new chains. He looked at Rihanna, a flicker of understanding passing between the mystic and the engineer. Your maps are of the cage, Rihanna. We need a map of the spire itself. Ask it. Ask the heart to show you the old paths. The ones that were here before Javax. Before the Republic. The paths the builders walked. Rihanna stared at him, her logical mind rebelling against the sheer, poetic impossibility of his words. But she had seen the impossible twice already today. With a shaky breath, she turned back to her datapad. Not trying to access the spire's network, but opening a direct, raw diagnostic feed from the heart's energy matrix. Okay. Heart, she mumbled, half to herself, half to the colossal, living crystal before her. If you can hear me, show me a way out. The datapad's screen, which had been a static schematic, flickered and dissolved into a chaotic, swirling pattern of golden light. A visual representation of the heart's own life force. Then, within the chaos, a single, intricate, silver line began to trace a path, a delicate thread of ancient purpose weaving its way through the golden sea. It was not a corridor or a turbolift. It was a vein, a capillary, a forgotten artery of the living mountain. By the core, Rihanna gasped. It's a servitor passage, a biomechanical conduit woven into the spire's original crystalline structure. It's not on any schematic because it's not a machine. It's part of the geology. It's alive. Her head snapped up, her eyes blazing with a wild, dawning hope. It bypasses all the modern systems. It leads all the way up, to a private, pre-Republic docking bay near the apex. A museum piece, a hangar that Javax probably doesn't even know exists. For the first time since the lights had come on, there was a path. A way out. Their prison had a secret door, and the prisoner itself was showing them the key. Their journey through the builder's vein was like traveling through the fossilized circulatory system of a long-dead god. The passage was not made of metal or rockcrete, but of a semi-translucent, crystalline substance that pulsed with a faint, internal golden light. It was a tunnel grown, not built. The air was warm and clean, humming with the gentle, life-affirming energy of the heart. It was a sanctuary, a secret, silent world hidden within the dying machine. As they moved, Ayla fell into step beside Naruto, her movements a silent, graceful dance in the confined space. When you listen, she asked, her voice a soft, conspiratorial whisper. What do you actually hear? Is it a voice? A sound? Naruto looked at the glowing walls around them. It is everything at once, he explained, his voice a low murmur. It is the slow, patient thought of the stone, dreaming of the pressure that made it. It is the memory of the water that once flowed here. It is the simple, happy song of the phosphorescent lichen that grows in that crevice. He pointed to a patch of softly glowing moss. It is the harmony of 1,000 million different lives, all singing their own small part of the same, endless song. You Jedi, you listen for the Force. For the one great river. But you miss the sound of the rain, the clouds, the streams, the quiet pools. You miss the music. He paused and looked at her, his gaze direct and piercing. You have a quiet pool inside you, Ayla Secura. A place of deep, still water. It is where the dancer waits. Javax, the war, the council, they are just stones thrown into it, creating ripples. Do not mistake the ripples for the water. The intimacy of his perception was a physical force, a warmth that spread through her chest. He was not just teaching her a new philosophy, he was seeing her, healing her, with his words. The Jedi hunter, the master of secrets, was learning that the greatest secret of all was her own forgotten self. And the pull towards this man, this teacher, this soul seer, was becoming an irresistible tide. Their moment of quiet contemplation was shattered by a new sound, an echo from the tunnel ahead. It was not the organic hum of the spire. It was the harsh, rhythmic clang of armored boots on crystal. They've found us, Ahsoka hissed, her hand flying to her lightsabers. Impossible, Rihanna countered, looking at her datapad. This passage is shielded, isolated. It doesn't exist on their systems. Javax does not need to see the path to know the destination, Luminara stated, her voice cold and hard as the crystal around them. He knows where we are going. He has sent his alpha predators to the hunting ground. They emerged from the passage into the cavernous, silent space of the forgotten hangar. It was a museum piece, as Rihanna had said. A single, elegant, crescent-shaped starship. Its hull a beautiful, swirling pattern of pearlescent metal, sat on the landing pad, covered in a thin layer of dust. It was their escape route. And between them and the ship stood a dozen figures. They were Javax's elite, clad in matte black armor that absorbed the light. Their helmets were featureless, save for a single, horizontal, crimson visor. They carried no blasters. In one hand, they held rectangular shields of a dull, gray metal that seemed to drink the energy of the Jedi's lightsabers. In the other, they held long, humming force pikes. These were not soldiers. They were Jedi killers. The figure at their lead stepped forward. His armor was identical, but he wore a black, crested helmet that marked him as the commander. Commander Valerius, he announced, his voice a cold, synthesized monotone. By the authority of Chancellor Javax and the Corporate Hegemony Charter, you are designated as hostile insurgents. The penalty is termination. We are Jedi Knights acting under the authority of the Republic. Luminara's voice rang with an authority that was completely ignored. The Republic has no authority here, Valerius stated. Only profit and loss, and you are a loss to be written off. With a single, sharp hand gesture, his squad advanced, their movements perfectly synchronized, a machine of deadly intent. The fight was brutal, swift, and utterly one-sided. The Jedi were masters of combat, but they were fighting a system designed specifically to dismantle them. The dull gray shields were made of cortosis, a rare mineral that shorted out a lightsaber on contact. Ahsoka's first furious charge ended with her blades hissing and dying, forcing her to rely on pure acrobatics to evade the crackling tips of 3 force pikes. Luminara, the master of Sorazu, the defensive form, found her perfect wall of defense useless against an enemy that did not fire projectiles, but simply advanced, a relentless, unstoppable tide of shields and pikes. Ayla's graceful, Balatic Ataru was hampered by the coordinated, flanking maneuvers of the squad, which seemed to anticipate her every move. An energy web, fired from a wrist-mounted launcher, caught her ankle, sending her crashing to the deck. They were being herded, dismantled, their individual strengths neutralized by a perfectly logical, ruthlessly efficient system of combat. Naruto had not moved. He stood near the entrance to the passage, his eyes closed, his head tilted. He was not watching the fight. He was listening to the song of the hunters. It was a perfect, harmonious melody of synchronized thought, of shared tactical data, of a singular, cold, clean purpose. There were 12 bodies, but there was only one mind. A beautiful, deadly, and utterly artificial song. Your harmony is perfect, he said. His voice quiet, yet it carried across the hangar, drawing the attention of Valerius himself. But it has a single, fragile keynote. He opened his eyes, and they were fixed not on the squad, but on their commander. You. Valerius turned, his featureless crimson visor focusing on Naruto. The anomaly. You are an unstructured variable. You will be erased first. He raised his own pike. Naruto smiled. You cannot erase a sound by shouting at it. He did not raise a hand. He did not move a muscle. He simply sang a different song. He reached out with the Aetherius, not as a force, but as a pure, conceptual broadcast, and he targeted the perfect, cold harmony of the Hunter squad. He did not introduce a paradox. He introduced an emotion, a single, pure, resonant note of doubt. He is going to sacrifice you. The idea, simple and venomous, was injected directly into the shared consciousness of the 11 soldiers. The effect was subtle, but immediate. The perfect, harmonious machine stuttered. A trooper who was about to bring his pike down on Ayla hesitated for a fraction of a second. A shield that had been perfectly angled to block Luminara wavered. The seamless, unified mind had been fractured by a single, selfish thought. Valerius felt it instantly. The psychic backlash of his squad's sudden, minute disunity was a jarring, discordant shock. Maintain fire discipline, he roared, his synthesized voice betraying a flicker of something akin to panic. But the seed was planted. The song of unity was broken. And in that single, discordant moment, the Jedi, masters of improvisation, struck. Ahsoka, her blades reigniting, was a whirlwind of fury in the suddenly flawed defense. Ayla, free of the web, was a blue-skinned phantom, her blade a whisper of death behind their lines. Luminara, her wall of defense now finding purchase, became a fulcrum, breaking their formation apart. In 10 seconds, it was over. The elite Jedi killers lay on the deck, their perfect harmony silenced forever. Only Valerius remained, his force pike held in a defensive stance, his crimson visor now fixed on Naruto with a newfound sense of terror. What did you do? He demanded, his voice a synthesized gasp. I gave your instruments a new piece of music to read, Naruto said, walking calmly past him towards the waiting starship. They did not like the composition. As the rest of the group, battered but victorious, scrambled up the ramp of the pearlescent ship, Rihanna was already in the cockpit, her hands flying over the ancient, unfamiliar controls. The power is on, she shouted. The heart is with us. But as the engines began to wind to life, a colossal holographic image of Chancellor Javax flickered into existence, filling the entire hangar, his face a mask of triumphant fury. You have won nothing, his voice boomed. The heart was only my first project. A crude, organic power source. Now, you will witness the birth of my true masterpiece. The dawn of a new, perfect, silent order. Behind his holographic image, the hangar wall dissolved, revealing a vast, dark chamber beyond. In its center floated a perfect, black sphere, a hole in reality that seemed to drink the golden light of the spire. It was the null core. With a flick of Javax's wrist, it activated. It did not roar or hum. It was the opposite of sound. A wave of absolute, profound silence, a null energy field, erupted from it. The beautiful, golden light of the heart began to flicker, to gutter, to die in its presence. The ship's engines whined and sputtered as the wave of absolute nothingness washed over them. Their escape route was dying. The living soul of the spire was being silenced. And as the last vestiges of the golden light faded from Rihanna's horrified face, they were left staring into the perfect, beautiful, all-consuming darkness of the void. Chapter 9 End. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.